Good evening, everyone. I will call this regular work session of the Burnsville City Council to order, and we go directly to our agenda items. And so the first item on the agenda this evening is our 2018 audit report from our independent auditor, MMKR. And I'm going to have Kelly Stry make the introductions of our auditors. Kelly?
Okay. Thank you. MMCare just completed our annual audit that we have them do every year. And Jim Eichten and Jackie Heil will be here on our engagement, and they will be presenting for us tonight. Thank you.
Welcome, Jim and Jackie. And as usual, this is the time we get to see you, and you tell us how we're doing.
Yeah, well, everything is going great, so we'll start there. The audit went very smooth this year, as it has in the past. My role this evening, or the goal this evening, is to present the audit information and have the council receive the information. And I'll touch on the highlights. I think it's important to also be aware that we did have obviously an informational meeting, an exit conference with the administration, who approves the report prior to this evening. And they're forwarding it to you for your acceptance. We do have a PowerPoint. I think it's important, first of all, to understand the role of the auditor. It is a requirement in state law that the city prepares an annual financial statement. That annual financial statement is quite lengthy, actually. The city does a tremendous job of providing information in a very comprehensive format. That particular financial statement is required to be audited by an independent certified public accountant, which is our role here with the city. In an audit of this nature, we do issue what's called opinions on various aspects of the audit. First of all, we provide an opinion on that financial statement. That financial statement is required to be completed in accordance with governmental accounting standards. Audit standards also require us to test your internal controls, specifically to financial reporting. We also audit your compliance with laws and regulations that, again, relate to financial statement preparation. The Office of the State Auditor in the state of Minnesota requires us to audit your compliance with Minnesota-specific laws and regulations. Those laws are provided to us in a list. We don't audit every law, just those laws that they provide on the list. And the list does change. We have some laws this year that have become findings for several of our clients as a result of the change in the list. And then lastly, the city is required to have what's called a single audit of federal awards. Anytime a local government receives more than $750,000 of federal awards, you're required to have what's called the single audit of federal awards, which is guided by federal standards, defined what's called uniform guidance. And under uniform guidance, we test your compliance with individual major programs, which typically is the largest spending category of those federal funds. And then your internal controls over the spending of those particular funds. So as part of the role of the auditor, we issue a document that's called the management report. And in that management report, the intent of the report is to provide a written document that you could read as a member of council, or really anybody, and get an understanding of how the audit results were without actually me presenting it. And I'm here because I like to be here. No, I'm kidding. No,
And it's good for our citizens to hear from
Absolutely.
you.
We like to have the document as well as present it, because I think it's a good context in both forms. So in that document, you'll find that on the financial report, we did issue what's called an unmodified opinion. It was the opinion you were looking for as part of the audit process. We also like to use the word clean. That's not the technical term, and a clean opinion is probably a little more clear to the average reader. In that opinion, there's one important aspect that changed this year. There's a paragraph, what's in audit standards is defined as an emphasis of a matter. This year, the city did implement a new accounting standard. They were required to under governmental accounting standards on GASB Statement 75. GASB Statement 75 is the reporting of your obligations for OPEB, other post-employment benefits. Other post-employment benefits really are liabilities you have for employees for paying for health insurance post their employment status with the city. The change really there is simple. or not really that simple, but simply they're requiring you to report the full liability now in your financial statements, when previous to this year, they were requiring you to report how well you were funding that obligation. And there's a significant difference, can be a significant difference in those two numbers, depending on the calculations by staff and the actuarial people that are involved in that particular transaction. As continuing on in my management report as well as the PowerPoint, we did not have any other findings to report, which is exceptional. We had no findings actually overall on the whole particular audit, which is exceptional. It was exactly the result you were looking for. It is the perfect gold star, if you will, for this year's audit. I wanted to actually highlight something even more probably noteworthy. The cities, when we go through the single audit of federal awards, the federal government actually requires us to do an evaluation as to the status of the risk of your single audit. Either you're considered low risk or you're considered not low risk. And this year, your city is actually considered a low risk auditee. I don't know if it's the first time, but it's probably unusual for a city to actually be a low-risk auditee. Typically, cities don't get federal awards very often or not as consistent. And if they do, you typically see findings in federal award audits because of that inconsistency. So for the last 3 years, the city has not received a finding in that single audit of federal awards, which classifies you as a low-risk auditee, which is very impressive to me. It's something that's new and different than we've seen in the past. So congratulations in that aspect as well. Moving on in my report, the management report does go through a lot of other information. It provides really the timing of the audit. It is a requirement in state law that you submit your financial statement to the Office of the State Auditor by June 30th, and certainly with acceptance this evening, you'll meet that timing requirement. We also provide other information, communications in that report to really give the reader a sense for how the audit went, as I had previously mentioned. So, continuing on, the management report also provides information on what I call the second aspect of the audit. So the first aspect is, well, how well are you doing from a compliance perspective? And certainly with no findings in that area, you're doing very well. Financially, the city does very well as well. And so that's really the second part of the audit. And my management report starts with what I call, in this area, analysis of property tax trends. It's an important aspect of the audit to understand that we don't give an opinion on the financial results in terms of how well you're doing. We're only providing information that what's being reported is accurate. But we do like to provide information on trends and techniques and what's happening compared to other cities. So we start with property taxes, as I mentioned. Property taxes in the Twin City metropolitan area are increasing. For taxes payable 2018, the market values increased about 10%. It was 9.4%, which is similar to other cities that we audit here in the metropolitan area. A noteworthy aspect of this line, as we've gone through this audit season, we've noticed that most cities are really getting back to where they were back at the taxes payable
Before.
2009 level, and you could almost see if you put a bar across the top, it's almost
Before the recession.
Yes, and that was, that
After it.
may have been the
after.
high
But
point.
with the 2 year.
With the 2-year
delay.
lag.
Yes. So
With the
so-
2-year lag is
right,
what you look at.
2009 is actually valuation January 1st of 2007, and 2018 is January 1st, 2016, right? Yes, that's right. Or January 1st, 2017, excuse me. So you're on 2-year lag. So that's almost the high point back at that prior to the recession, and noteworthy that you're getting back there. With few exceptions, most people are really getting almost to that exact point. And if they're above it, there is a particular reason that entity is there. So I think that's a highlight, certainly. We also provide information on tax rates. This particular graph shows the average tax rates of the city for the last 3 years, as well as other taxing entities. as a result of those market value increases, you're seeing actually decreases in the tax rate being used. Typically, when you would see lower tax rates, you might see lower tax revenues. Well, that's not the case here because market values are compensating for that lower tax rate. And that can actually be seen on this particular presentation that's in my report. This particular presentation shows governmental funds revenue per capita. So governmental funds are the general fund, the special revenue funds, the debt service funds, as well as the capital funds. So governmental funds per capita shows that property taxes are actually per capita are increasing. So even though your tax rate is going down, you're still generating an increase in property taxes on a per capita basis, which is certainly a positive revenue trend this year in the city. In total, the city generates $918 per resident on an annual basis. That compares to a city in your population range of about 967. So it's a little bit less typically, and that's pretty typical for your city. We've seen that for any number of years, the trend continues. One outlier here in this particular graph that does stand out to us was in the area of charges for services. The city did see a significant increase in emergency medical services. That's EMS, right?
Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure I had that right. There's an increase in revenues in that particular area this past year, which is noteworthy in terms of financial results. We also provide information on the correlation to that previous graph, which is really on the expenditures. So typically when you see a city that has revenues per capita less than the average, you typically see expenditures less than average. And that can be seen here. Overall, the city's expenditures on a per capita basis was $934 per resident, which compares to about $1,081 at a comparable city. So revenues are less than average, and you would correlate that to expenditures as well. One item that does make the city stand out is in this particular graph is you do have a full-time fire department, which actually causes the public safety line, or in this particular presentation, to be higher than your comparable city, which is nothing more than just to highlight nothing wrong or right about that, other than it is something to note. So we'll move on then to the presentation of individual funds. My audit goes through each individual fund and provides a lot of information. I'll start with the general fund. The general fund is the most significant fund within the city. It is roughly a $35 million operation, which is significant certainly for a city your size. When looking at these results for this year, the city did see an increase in its overall fund balance. At the end of the year, the increase was roughly $1.9 million. The city does have a policy in place to, have a goal in terms of fund balance. Fund balance is important to a city in a local government of this nature because you're only receiving property taxes twice a year. So it's like getting revenues twice a year and having to live for 6 months on that particular cash. Well, the fund balance is really your savings that allows you to cash flow throughout the year. Your fund balance policy states that you would need a minimum of 35% fund balance as a percentage of operations. At the end of the year, your fund balance represents about 56% of your overall operations. Typically, the city takes those results and works those into future budgeting discussions, which I know is the next agenda item. So certainly that will come to play in the next discussion. We also provide information on budget to actual results in the general fund, as well as 5-year trend lines we're seeing on this particular graph. The financial results this year have they been for many years. We as auditors love to see revenues slightly above projections and expenditures slightly below projections, and that's the perfect result from an audit standpoint. And this year that's no different. The general fund saw revenues exceeding budget by about 1.5 million. Licenses and permits was probably the highlight in that particular budgetary discussion. I would say that your city is like many others we're auditing, and the economy is actually driving development significantly throughout our Twin City metropolitan area, and a lot of cities saw increases in licenses and permits this past year. This particular trend line you can see on the PowerPoint does have one noteworthy item, I believe. When you look at that tax line, you might wonder, well, why is taxes lower in 2018? There was a change in the way that the city reported property tax revenues this year. And instead of having it go into the general fund and have it be transferred to its appropriate location, it was put there directly in 2018. So you're seeing a decline on the particular graph, but overall, governmental funds as collectively really did not see a decline in property taxes, even though it's shown there. We also provide information on expenditures. Here it shows a 5-year presentation. Overall expenditures were below budget by about $1 million, 2.5% of your operation, which is very good in terms of overall budgeting, given the size of your organization and the number of departments you really have. If every department spent less than budget, it accumulates up to $1 million pretty fast. So there really isn't any one thing that stands out in the expenditure area. It's many different departments spending below their budgeted allocation. This particular presentation that you're seeing in the PowerPoint is actually interesting to me, or noteworthy to me, because it looks exactly like every other city that I've seen, that I've looked at this year. Most of the categories you see over the last 5 years are pretty flat. General government, public works, culture, rec, all those are flat, other than the one, public safety. You're no different than any city that we look at. Public safety seems to be a higher, growing at a higher than for a variety of reasons. Some of which is it's a priority. Priority to local governments, and really the cost of doing business in that particular area is increasing. So that's probably the most noteworthy item in that particular graph. So we also provide information on enterprise funds. Enterprise funds really are your business type activities, the activities that run like businesses within the city. Water sewer fund for any city really is the main enterprise fund. It's roughly generates about $15 million in revenue, which is a very sizable operation if you think about it from a business perspective. The water sewer fund did see a slight increases in revenues and slight expenditures were pretty much flat. One highlight of this graph, or one highlight of the particular fund, it probably doesn't show up in this graph, is that the city's going through a significant water meter replacement project, which does show up financially because of the replacement of those meters. So you're really replacing meters, and you really don't have a cash loss, but it does show up financially as a loss from disposal of old meters. So if you were to look in the details of the financial, you might pick up on that, but it certainly doesn't have an overall impact on the financial results of the city, as you can see on that graph. We also provide information on the Stormwater Fund. The Stormwater Fund is seeing solid results, very consistent from one year to the next. The difference between the purple line and the green line is operating income, which is ultimately depreciation. Operating income, when you exclude depreciation, is doing very well positively. When you fund your depreciation, you're below the line slightly. Not a concern as we look at overall financial results of the city. We do also provide information on the Ames Center. This, to me, as an auditor that's been around for a little while, is very impressive. It has been operation enterprise fund that the city's worked very diligently at and in improving over time. And you can see in the 4 years, or in the last 3 years, provided on that graph, and it's grown significantly in both the revenues as well as the expenditures matching those revenues, and the overall financial results from a cash flow perspective are improving greatly over those last several years. So very impressive results with the AIM Center. I'm going to go past that one. So overall, my management report also provides good information on overall financial results, legislative information, and we do provide significant warnings for future accounting standards that might be impacting the city, which we discussed at our exit conference. So with that, I did mention that I was able to provide a clean opinion on the city's financial statement. I did have the one emphasis of a matter that was identified earlier. No findings to report, was exceptional. Certainly the results you were looking for. The city does receive in the past, and we fully anticipate they will receive a certificate of excellence in financial reporting from the GFOA. And overall, the city's has a solid financial condition. All of the financial results are in positive trends. And lastly, I just want to highlight, I always say this at this particular presentation, one of the aspects of we as auditors look for is in a finance staff as well as the staff of the operation here is the concern over the continuing assessment improvement, both in the financial results but also the controls of the city. They're always asking us questions. How can we improve the controls? What did you find when you went out and talked to people at the various organizations and departments that we see? Is there ways we can improve, at AIM Center or ICE Center or whatever it might have been? There's a high level of concern over improving and having appropriate levels of controls. And that is very, very important as an auditor to hear and see, and we continue to see that each and every year as we process this audit. So with that, I can answer any questions that you might have for me on my presentation. I went through things very quickly, but certainly open for any questions that you might have.
Okay. Jim and Jackie, thank you very much. I think it's always great for our citizens to hear you give this auditor's report. And one of the things is that I always listen for is the findings and whether we have a clean audit. I always want to make sure that our residents know and our businesses know that we're very conservative and also fiscally responsible here at the city, and that we're prudent in the way that we take care of the people's money, because at the end of the day, it is their money. I also want to highlight one of the things that you also spoke to, and what I read has to do with our staff, and I want to thank our staff for their conservative work in terms of their budgets, where this year it's $1 million in savings that each and every one of them have done. So that's admirable. But at the same time, I think it should be for us as the decision makers to understand that my guess is that if I were to dig a little deeper into the details, some of that is probably delayed payment or some of the other things that they have on their plate. For instance, like I would go to Jenny and you have some consultants fees that you're going to have to also pay that you may have hired last year, because we did some of that. So I'm cognizant of all of that, even though it shows up on the books as a savings and a total operations of the organization as $1 million, but there's probably in every department some delayed work that needs to be addressed. And I'm looking at Kelly because she's on top of all of this stuff. So I want to express my deepest gratitude to our staff for the work that they do for the city of Burnsville, and thank them for their service, because the report that you, as an independent auditor, has given to us has said that our staff have done a great job with a clean audit that you're reporting on. And I also like hearing that we have good internal controls. There was a time that we needed to put policies in place, right, Kelly, to make sure that we had good internal controls on all areas. And I know that, Jim, you made one of those first reports with regard to the internal controls. between what was going on in Public Works and how it was reported. So, and all of that is now closed, and every year I have seen continuous improvement with clean audits, and all of those things were fixed immediately. So thank you again, and thank you to our staff, because we have around over 50 budget preparers in the city who look very focused and cleanly on all the things that they do. So to Kelly and Melanie and all of our department heads, thank you very much.
If I can ask a question.
Kara.
Thank you. This is not just us specific, but how do the laws get on the list for the legal audit? And could you give me an example of what was new this year?
Sure. So the laws are are provided by the list are solely the responsibility of the Office of the State Auditor. So I really can't speak to how they get on the list. My gut tells me that when the Office of State Auditor is also in charge of, if you have a concern as a public citizen, or even just as a ordinary person, that you would report. They get reports of things that they might not feel are happening accurately. So when they accumulate those lists, they tend to take those laws and add them to the audit list. So one example that we're having actually findings with on several of our clients this year is there's a law that requires the city to pass along the fire relief association, the volunteer fire relief association's dollars within a 30-day period.
And we're not a
So you get
volunteer.
aid or some, and then you're required to pass that along to the Fire Relief Association for 30 days. Well, 30 days is pretty quick in a business sense. So we have a lot, at least I had a couple that were 37 days, and we had some that have another one, 45 days. So we're passing it along, it just wasn't in 30 days. Well, that landed on the list this year. So we tested it and found, several cities that were non-compliant. So that's an example of a law.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Jim, wasn't there one year when somebody complained about tax increment financing, and then it made the list, and then
Absolutely.
it went away, and we were good in that area,
Yeah.
because I remember when that made the list, and But-
The year before, it was the designation of depositories. You're required
Yeah.
to designate an individual to
Yeah.
be the designated depository individual, and that was a law that'd been on the books for a long, long time, and it landed on the list. I can't tell you why. I mean, it seems odd that that's an important thing, but it must have been important to somebody. So,
Thank you. I appreciate that.
yeah, Kelly.
I think there are others too that are more significant, like bids and quote testing, those kinds of things that they test.
they're very important. We've had, over the years, health insurance bids have become an added thing that's been on there. We hadn't tested that in the past, and we don't find a lot of findings in that area, but we've added that over the years as an item. So there's been a variety of things.
Yeah. Any other comments? Okay. Jim and Jackie, thank you so much for coming in, and thank you, because I think it's always important, Jim, that you do this on camera.
Yeah, I do too.
Because I think it's important for our citizens to hear that not only did we hire an independent auditor, because you report directly to us, to audit how the organization is run and whether we are fiscally responsible with the people's money. And they need to know that, and they need to hear that from you, not us.
Right.
So, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, now you can enjoy the rest of your evening.
We'll try.
Yeah, thank you. And members of the council, I need a motion to adopt the auditor's report.
So moved.
Okay, I'll have.
I'll take the second.
Okay, Councilmember Schultz makes a motion, second by Councilmember Gustafson. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay, and a motion carries. Thank you very much. Okay, and now we move on to the second item on our agenda, and that is the preliminary five-year financial plan for the 2020 budget. Presenting this evening is our Finance Director, Kelly Stry, who has been our financial guru for years. She knows how things are done. So Kelly, welcome.
Thank you. You'll find that a number of items that Mr. Eichten talked about will be consistent with what we talk about now going forward, or he talked about them for the past year, and we'll carry that forward into the budget process. Excuse me. So, at this time of year, we've been doing this process for many years, where we give you in June a beginning look at what the budget is, what pressures are coming, and what are we anticipating for the upcoming year. And so that's where we are tonight. We'll talk about well, you saw the audit presentation already, and then we'll talk about the financial management plan pressures. And we're going to talk a little bit about franchise fees as well tonight. And then that leads us into the next meeting that you'll have, which is the max tax discussion and CIP. And we also will have some department presentations at that time. We're changing this up a bit. We've normally had that in August, but the max tax is now able to be set by the end of September, so that gives us a little
Really?
bit more time. It has been for a
Was that
couple years.
Was that a change in the law?
It was a couple years ago, and we're just now sort of
Adapting
taking
to it?
advantage of that and having one later meeting. It gives staff more time to fully prepare the max tax, so you'll see that a little bit more complete than where we've done more of an interim presentation on that. So. And then you will be adopting a maximum tax levy September 17th. That is the amount that will go on the proposed property tax statements that people will have mailed to them in November. And that is the maximum amount that the levy can be. It cannot go higher after that point in time, but it can be reduced after that point. We will be giving you your proposed budget book by the end of September this year. So we have moved that timeline up as well. The fact that we have a little bit more time to prepare before we do the max tax gives us more time to get that ready for you and bring that earlier. So we think that that will be a positive change. We're hoping that you will like that. Then in October, we've had our budget video, our virtual open house that we've done for a number of years. A few minutes long, kind of talks about what the city does in each of the departments and how the tax dollars contribute to the operations of the city. We're looking at changing that up some this year, so we will have some kind of community engagement and communication during October. But we're not exactly sure what that is at this point in time, but we'll be freshening that up. And because we're moving up the proposed budget book, we're moving up our budget meetings one meeting. So normally you've had 2 meetings in November. We're going to have the first one in October. And then the second meeting is your optional meeting. If you need additional time to discuss, we can have the follow-up meeting on November 12th. Last year you did choose not to have that meeting, but we'll keep it on the calendar, and it is available. And then you will be adopting tax levies and budget December. I see I left out the date. The 3rd, I think, is the date. Something like that. First week in December. Tonight, I guess I actually covered most of this in the previous slide, but we're really looking to give you information and for you to give us some preliminary feedback on what staff can do as they start to prepare their budgets and what you're looking for, your thoughts. Are the service levels still in line with what your wishes are? And what other things would you like us to consider? So that is the goal of this evening. The budget is prepared with the city's vision in mind. As staff works on it, we are looking at this Burnsville vision as our guide as to how we prioritize and set our goals. And then, of course, the end statements follow that as well. So that just gives us further guidelines as to how we are focusing and prioritizing the use of the city's resources. So the budget, it is the city's priorities. It's the council's directions and priorities, and with a respect for resources. So we're continually looking at operational opportunities and improvements. How can we do what we've been doing differently, or funding it differently? Just always looking at new things that we've learned from what we've done, and always continuous improvement. And then how do we communicate that value of city services to our taxpayers? Also looking in that. And how do we respond to unfunded mandates? So sometimes there are things that, new things that we have to do. And how do we build that into our budget? And so we are doing that. Really trying to be creative and visionary as we're looking to that long-term focus of our of needs and how we're going to meet them. And then our budget framework provides that long-term perspective. A key phrase in that vision is for a reasonable investment. And that's why you have your financial management ends and outcomes. We have a AAA bond rating, which is the highest bond rating that is possible. We are doing 5-year financial plans for every single one of the city's funds. So we are looking at just not just what is the 2020 challenges, but what decisions that are made for 2020, how do they have effects on those future 5 years? So that has really helped us. It helps us anticipate future needs. It helps us keep things sort of level, even out the peaks and valleys of things that happen, and anticipate future needs and challenges.
And Kelly, on the rating agencies and some of the reports that I see from them, this is one of the things that they like that we do.
Yes.
We have a 5-year budgeting plan and a 5-year CIP.
Yes. That really does
Rate high.
rate very highly for us. And it's one of those things we don't do just for the rating agency. It actually is.
It's good.
It's the
It's
value.
good business
It is.
practice.
It's a great practice, and you've been doing that for many years, probably
Yep.
15. I
Yep.
think is when we started doing the 5-year financial
Yep.
plans, and it makes the whole budget process flow a lot more quickly, and it's efficient for departments, because budgets are, it's a hard thing to do. We just had our first budget meetings with departments today, and there's a long list of things that they're supposed to take care of during this process. But the fact that we are looking forward, it really makes that an efficient process, because it does take a lot of people's time and energy as well. So we want to make use of that as best we can, so we can get them back out and providing those services that are of value to the community. So budget pressures are identified for future years, and fund balances are managed to provide adequate cash flow and contingency reserves, as Mr. Eichten was referring to our fund balance policies and whether we have enough reserves. And then we look at where can those reserves be used as tax relief as well. So if we're at the levels that we need them to be, there's some one-time expenditures that can be funded from fund balance, and judicious use of fund balance so that we can continue on in a financially sustainable manner. So that's really important, that we're not tapping fund balances just to make the budget balance. We are using them for one-time purposes that do not come back to have a tail the next year and cause a problem the next year.
Having to backfill.
As we look at maintaining that AAA bond rating, these are the qualities that they're looking for in the green, and some of the things that that we do and the things that are affected by those things. I won't go through each one of those, but many of the decisions that you make affect these items. Some of them you can't
Yeah.
have as much of effect on, but the ones that we can, we do try to keep in line. And again, the benefit of that AAA bond rating is lower borrowing costs.
Yeah.
So as we're funding our long-term investments, particularly our street improvements where we have special assessments, our water and sewer fund, those major costs and renovations that we have in that area, we're funding through bonding. We will be having replacement of the fire station. You've had, recently we've been able to refinance both the Ames Center debt over the last couple of years and then the ICE Center debt at extremely low interest rates. And that provides tax relief as well. So that's the goal of maintaining those things. So our goal with the budget development is to develop a budget that's fiscally sustainable, which delivers a high level of service, which encourages creative problem solving, recognizes the importance of investing in both personnel and capital, and maximizes the variety of revenue sources in alignment with our ends and outcomes. So those are, it really kind of comes down to that. There's a lot of pieces that go into the budget, but most everything relates back to this. The legislative session always brings us some new things to consider, it seems like. But this year, we have no levy limits, and we haven't had for a while, but it's always something that we're noting. And we have the second year of a police and fire pension contribution increase that is affecting us, and we did. They did continue the host community grant funding, which is very helpful to us as well. So those are just a few of the things that have a fiscal impact on the city, and we'll be incorporating these things into our budget projections. The estimated market value is the basis for how property taxes are spread amongst the property owners. So this is one of the factors in what ends up being the tax rate, and so it's something to consider as you're as we're looking at the budget process and our resources and how it will affect the residents and other property owners of the city. So this slide shows us how did property values change for various property types this year. And again, remembering that there is a lag, as Mr. Eichten mentioned earlier, as we're tag teaming on some of these same topics. But this valuation is from January 1st of 2019 that will be used for the 2020 property tax levy spread. And that's really based on the valuations, the sales that happened during the year 2018. So there's really quite a time lag in how those valuations run through. It also reflects new construction, but that there's a time lag there as well. So it has to be completed and have been on the assessed books as of January 1st. So as we're looking at this, there is a tiny green line on the top of those that shows what the new construction was. We are experiencing a time lag. So the new construction that we've had, there's been some really nice growth and projects that you've authorized and investment in the city that's been occurring. It didn't hit, or not a lot of it hit in this year's property taxes, but I think that there is a valuation that we will be seeing in the following year. So in process.
Kelly, mostly when the building is complete, it still doesn't have the full value of that product
That's right.
for another 2 years because they have so much to go through with the calculations before they have the complete value of the product on the books. Am I correct in remembering that?
Yeah, I think there is a timing difference, and it really kind of depends on what time of year.
Yeah, when they have
that
their
property-
CO.
was completed, and
Yeah,
we don't have a lot of details on that, but
it's a county thing.
yeah, that's up to the county.
Yeah, Dan?
Well, for the first time in I don't know how long, it's nice to see the CI
Yes.
close to residential. I just pulled up 2019's
Yeah.
forecast, and it was 2.5% against residential at 7.6. This is the first time in a long time I
Yeah.
remember them all being fairly close.
Because
in
usually
valuation growth.
residents were carrying the water for the business.
And from the recession,
Yeah.
they were
Really
going
upside
down,
down.
and commercial industrial was quite a bit higher. They maintained better value through the
Yeah.
recession. Now residential's caught up, and then commercial got soft,
Yeah.
but now it's going
Yeah,
up.
yeah,
Well, their values are going up, and that's what we're looking at here.
yeah.
I would say the commercial's probably still lagging behind a bit from
You're-
where they're at, but their values themselves are going up.
Yes,
No, you're
that's what I'm
right.
talking about. The
Yeah.
percent change of value has been lagging for quite some time.
It has,
It's seeing a 6%
Yeah.
MCI. I don't remember the last time we had anything that large.
Because I
Yes.
think you have a slide, Kelly, where you'll show who's paying the most, and that slide will come, well,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say that the good news about this chart was that was, that you were saying that. So you're absolutely right. That
Yeah.
was well
Yeah,
timed.
it's 6.2.
And so what we'll see in a future slide is that the increase for this year will be spread more evenly between all property types. And so that is, that's going to be a good thing. We really talked a lot about the first part of this already, the time lag and the valuations. One other thing that is coming on the books this year is the decertification of Hardest City Tax Increment District Number 6. So there was a planned increase at the Ames Center debt service way back when that was originally issued.
Yeah.
To be timed with the decertification of this, so the bond, the debt service was a fairly level amount for quite a number of years, and now there is an equal increase that represents what will be provided by this additional tax base coming back onto the general tax rolls. And it does closely offset that increase in the levy. And so that particular portion of the increase in the levy has really a neutral effect on the median home that will see it, because it's spread amongst more property value. This is a slide that's showing you just what we were talking about, that there has been a shift to residential over the past years from commercial and industrial properties on the valuation. So this is actual tax capacity. So this takes into account the rates at which residential versus commercial and industrial pay taxes, and looks at how much of the pie is being paid by each piece. And for the first time in a number of years, that number that residential has stayed the same. So that is good. And residential home values have continued to increase over that period of time. And while they have been taking on more of that tax, it actually is a really good indication of the value of residents' property within the city, and that they're maintaining their value and increasing in value. And so that goes to the maintaining of your infrastructure, and good things that have been happening in Burnsville have been contributing to this, that people's property values have been able to continue to increase. So the residential median value home went up about 5% for this year, 2020. And that indicates sale prices of homes in Burnsville have steadily increased. This slide is about fiscal disparities. And fiscal disparities is Minnesota's program that began back in the 70s, and it pooled a portion of the growth of commercial and industrial property across the metro. Burnsville has historically been a net contributor in that more valuation goes into the pool than comes back out of the pool for Burnsville. And the net effect of that really is that approximately $3 million of property taxes paid by Burnsville's commercial and industrial properties doesn't stay in Burnsville. It goes to the pool. And that results in a higher tax rate for Burnsville properties to raise the same amount of revenue. There's nothing you can do about that. That it is, but it's of note. It has our net contributor factors going down slightly because there has been some other suburban cities that have had more growth than we have. We contributed a lot in the early years, and as they have been developing more, they've contributed some more. So our portion of that has gone down, but we still are one of the larger net contributors to the pool. Just a fact. This comparison just shows you where we are within Dakota County cities as far as our tax rate, and we're really in the middle of Dakota County cities, with the larger cities being on the right-hand side of the chart and the more residential, smaller cities on the left-hand side. It just gives you a point of reference. This slide, we have to be careful how we compare ourselves here, because some of it is a little apples to oranges kinds of things. These cities are similar in size and population, and in the metro area, we consider them to be our market cities. But they are in different counties, and each county has a little different split in what the city pays for versus what the county pays for. Dakota County is the lowest county tax rate, so we bear some more of costs that maybe some other cities are not needing to. But each city, they make different choices. They have different market values and everything, but it gives you kind of a perspective. What I see from this is that there is a group in the middle there that are very similar amounts and similar size. So we are not out of line with that. I have starred the cities that have franchise fees, and that is a revenue source that we have used some. We get about $1.2 million in franchise fees, but our franchise fee rate is significantly lower, and we'll talk about that in a future slide here, than other cities. So they are collecting more in the some as high as $4 to $5 million in franchise fees. So what they are paying for would otherwise be funded by property taxes. So there is a difference there as we're looking at that. I think that's a significant difference. As you look at the ones that are to the right of this slide, most of them do have franchise fees. And Bloomington is not, I just want to make a note, Bloomington is not one of our market cities, but they are a neighbor and a point of reference as their population is higher, but it's a point of reference of what the next tier of cities is. As I mentioned earlier, we have used fund balance on one-time kinds of expenditures, and each year council considers current level of fund balance and considers whether some of these items might be funded by available fund balance. You have a policy for use of fund balance. It's generally reserved for one-time, non-recurring expenditures, and we do that because if you were to fund, say, a program with staffing or something like that, it would just mean that we would have a hole to fill next year. This is more for a capital item that would otherwise be a spike in expenditures, or something that occurs not very frequently, like we had the comp plan amendment activity that we did, that doesn't happen very frequently, and so we we don't raise property taxes to fund that sort of thing, because that's one of those things that it's managing that peak and those peaks and valleys, as I referred to earlier. The ICE Center debt is somewhat different. This was a commitment that was made several years ago to set aside $1.4 million of available fund balance and make 10 years worth of annual contributions to the debt service on the ICE Center bonds. It's not the whole amount that was otherwise paid for. There's still debt service on the ICE Center bonds, but it's a portion. And this is something that needs to be reaffirmed each year if the fund balance is available, whether council would want to switch to a debt service levy, which would increase the property tax levy. So I'm guessing that is not something that you are wishing to do, so we haven't included it as such, but if you are wanting to change that, we could. And then we have had, it's been the city's practice to fund election expenditures out of fund balance as well. It's an every other year expense. In the past, it's been a smaller expense. With additional election requirements, increasing wages that we need to pay, and additional in the coming year, and a third or a presidential primary. I think I got that right, Michelle? Is that
We now
right?
have 3 elections.
So
During the
that
presidential
cost
year,
is
rather
growing,
than
and it is something that we'll consider looking at some strategies on how we fund that in the future, perhaps spreading it out over 2 years and maybe increasing the levy a bit. We just want to make sure that we are not drawing down on our fund balance more than would be a good plan. But at this point, that's where we're planning for it from. Then we also have our portion of fund balance that originated from landfill tipping fees in the past. So these are not the host fees that we have now. These are tipping fees that happened in the past. They are restricted by state statute. 25% was to be spent on landfill abatement activities. And we use that for funding our sustainability program, our recycling program, and other activities that can be tied to that. It is a finite amount of money, so right now there's enough expenditure, enough balance to continue this out for quite a number of years, but it is not a balance that's being added to. We're just using it. We have had there's a trash enclosure at the Ames Center that has been identified as something the city needs, and we have proposed to use some of this funding for that, but it's being reevaluated at this time due to cost. So it's up there as a placeholder.
Okay, Dan?
Just a quick question back on the previous slide, the ICE Center debt service. It seems like we're getting close to 10 years. Do you?
We are.
We are.
Retire
We
that?
are to retire that. Is it 2
Do you
more
know
years
what you're-
left on it?
2021.
Jenny? That's what I was thinking, 2 years left on it. Yeah. Yeah.
So, yep. So this is just a visual of the fund balance and our target range. So we have the 35% policy, which represents cash flow. You've also had a policy or a guideline to have an additional $2 million above that 35% for contingencies. That would be for things like that happen, like unusual high snow years. Not that we ever have those, but
Or
Or
storms that
storms.
run through the city and
Floods.
create floods, yes.
So that's what that $2 million has been. I converted that $2 million to a percentage for the purposes of this. It's something we've been talking about doing. The $2 million has been a number that we set actually back late 90s, early 2000,
98?
shortly after we had
98,
a
99?
couple windstorms and
Yep.
floods.
Then
And we kind of
90
targeted.
Yeah, was it 98 where we
May
read?
1998.
98
The
was
60
such a
mile per hour
bad,
straight lane winds that wiped out all the trees and everything.
yeah, wiped out all of the trees. And, oh,
So we've only really gotten into that, where we've had to dip into that number. One year, and when the recession first started, when our investments had a paper loss, that was a mark-to-market
Yeah.
adjustment that we needed to make. It was never realized, and it came back the following year as the values went back up again. But I think it demonstrates the need for having that contingency there, that we're not dipping into that 35% because we have that other contingency.
yeah. The other thing about whether it's storms or any kind of environmental climate issues, FEMA also says that they'll pay us stuff, but what we experienced was it was like 5 years before they reimbursed us.
There was
And
a time lag. There
Huge time lag.
There is also there's a portion that we do need to fund ourselves.
Yep.
So there's a local portion, there's a
Yep.
state portion. There are other costs that are not reimbursed as
Yeah.
part of that. Our
Well, when we helped our residents with all of the trees that fell in their yard, and we said, you get it cut up and put it to the curb, and we will haul it away. And
Yep. And this balance also helps us, like in the time of a recession when we didn't anticipate
Yeah.
that permit revenues were going to go way down, or some of those things. It helps take a bite out of those things. So we just need to be prepared for
yeah,
that. So that 2 million converts to about 5%, which also seems like a pretty reasonable amount. 5% of next year's expenditures. So that target range is 35 to 40%. So that's your bar across there. And then the dark green columns are years that the 2 years that have already happened. So those are actual numbers. The 2019 is the 2019 budget. And then the green columns are just some projections that I've made going forward based on the fund balance uses. The blue numbers at the top are the numbers that were identified during the budget process as reserved for future spending. And that also includes the balances remaining on the ice center fund. So you'll see in the dark green years, those numbers are higher. That money didn't actually leave. It's going to be leaving in those future years as we actually pay down the 140. But that's why there's a little bit bigger chunk there. So you can see it, if we stay on this trajectory, and this is assuming that revenues and expenditures equal the budget. We don't have any of that savings that you've seen in this current year, so we're not contributing to it. But if you were to stay on this trajectory, we would be right at that top of that target level. I think in reality, we've always had savings. Doesn't mean that, that's guaranteed, but in reality, we'll probably be increasing that fund balance a little bit each year as well. This slide I put up here just as a point of reference. So when we are talking about a 1% change in the levy, what does that mean? So to lower the estimate by 1%, so from 6% to 5%, let's say, the levy going down, that would mean we'd have to make a 1% cut in current services, about $350,000. So it's a pretty significant amount of dollars to just change the levy by 1%. Sometimes 1% doesn't sound like a very big number
But it
until
is.
you put it in actual dollars of what that would mean in service cuts. Each 0.1% that's added or subtracted, but if we're talking about adding services, if we add about $36,000, we're increasing the levy by about 0.1%. Absent any other changes in revenues or any of those kinds of things. So what are the continued cost pressures? Why do we continually have these cost pressures? Well, the costs of maintaining general government services are really mainly funded by the tax levy. So there aren't fees for most services, and a lot of the fees that we have are fairly flat. This year, you'll see later in our presentation that we do have some fees that are increasing this year, providing us some offset, so that's good. But then let's see, proposed service level changes. If we have any additions to the base, which we may have, that would be in addition to these projections that we've made. So we're talking about a lights on, same service level, you know, if we're status quo, that's what these projections are. So we've updated the projections. We've had some positive revenue growth in permits and EMS charges for services. The compensation study implementation has also been factored into these projections, and those were, the council has seen those in the past. These projections are just estimates at this time. Staff are preparing their budgets, and they'll refine these numbers over the next 2 months. The green is the heart of the city TIF district decertification that I was talking about earlier. So we have an increase in the levy that's also has an almost matching increase in the tax rolls. So this is what that looks like to then an average residential home. So that median valued home that we saw in an earlier chart, it's $267,000. That home's value grew 5.1% this past year. They would see about a $40 increase, or $3.33 per month in property taxes. And the effect on $1 million, we've historically used this fictitious $1 million property, this hypothetical, I should say, $1 million commercial property, would see about a $362 increase. Now, for a number of years, they have had decreases.
That's right.
So this is the first year in a while where both arrows are pointing up. And if you looked at what we had last year with a 4.9% increase, the median value home, I think, was
Carried it.
more like $80 or $90 per year increase. So,
Yeah, Dan?
You know, last year we talked about numbers like this for the increases in that, but then we did hear from many residents that they had much larger increases that we kind of didn't anticipate. Can you kind of explain how that works?
Yeah.
'Cause I was actually one of those who went, wow, where'd that come from?
right.
Yeah.
Well, we are talking about here is the median value, but not every house changes the same. And last year, I think there was an extreme variance in how much change there was in different priced homes and in different neighborhoods based on market values. So there was a bigger demand for homes kind of in this $250,000 kind of price range, and that is strictly from the market. They had more sales, and then on some of our higher valued homes, we were not seeing the same kind of valuation changes. The spot checking that we've done this year seems to be a little bit more even throughout. So hopefully,
Yeah. The appraised value of your house must have been,
Oh, no,
Gone up?
it went up. It was,
Yeah.
it was,
Yeah, they
it was
were-
surprising the amount of the tax that went up, how it did, because, but I agree, it was in a
Yeah.
sweet spot, and and unfortunately, in our city, we have a lot of homes in that sweet spot. So some of your lower valued homes actually took a higher increase than the higher value homes did.
yeah.
Um,
So it was kind of a doubling of that tax shift. So we had the tax shift from commercial and industrial, to residential. And then within residential, we had variations at different points of value. And then the other thing that factors, kicks in at that point too, is that as home values are going up, if you are in the area, in the range that have the market value exclusion, your market value exclusion goes down, so your credit is less. And so that is another factor in it going up.
So it seems
you
to have
have less
stabilized now?
of a credit. I don't
I'm
have
not asking
all
for a
of-
guarantee, but.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that it seems like from what we've kind of seen, and we can bring back to you some more information on that it seems to be a little bit more even across areas.
Yeah,
We-
'cause
we're
my-
Dakota County has their assessor's office has like a heat map of increases, so we can see if we can get that, and that might paint a picture.
Okay.
Yeah, Kara?
And I will echo what you've been saying. I'm sure all of us heard back from persons who were in more modest homes and are lower income in our city, and listened to us last year go through all of this, listened to what an expected increase could be, and saw one that was many times, that's, their experience then was many times what they were led to expect. And I'm not throwing that on you, please understand. But they felt lied to or misled or that kind of thing, because that's also what we were relaying as well. This is the best information we have right now. This is what it appears to be. And it was a shocking disparity in what we thought and then what people experienced. So that makes this year's conversation interesting if we're saying, don't worry, it looks like a $40 increase.
So I also experienced an increased value in my assessed value. So I think perhaps it's how we communicate the difference between appraised value and assessed value, because my appraised value in my home went up. And that had a direct correlation then to the assessed value. So it has to look at and you talked about the market value. So when people talk to me and I said, so when you looked at the appraised value of your property, what was it last year and what was it this year? So the value of your home went up. So the value of your home went up, then that means your assessed value then is higher than what we're talking about with regard to the median home in Burnsville. And it appears that you are not the median home, you have a much higher value that has been appraised. Melanie?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would like to kind of build on that a little bit, because there are two things that we're talking about when we're talking
Yeah.
about somebody's property taxes, right? We're talking about what's within our control, which is this levy amount, and then your
Absolutely.
valuation,
Yeah.
which is outside. So all we can speak to is what we have control over. So that is, we can think about how to message
Message.
it with that feedback.
Yeah.
We can figure out how to tell the story a little bit more clearly, so people are less confused, hopefully. If that's something that the council's
I think that's a
interested in
great
doing.
thing to do, and especially when you can define appraised value and assessed value of the home, because those are two different things. Yeah, Dan?
We also have two sets of numbers. In your prior chart, residential went up 6.8% overall, all residential. And then we took an average priced home, and in the average range, it went up 5.1. So we're 1.7% off by publicizing an average, when in fact the whole went up 6.8, which means some houses may have gone up 7 or 8 or 9%, and others 3, 4, 5%. We don't have that. So we're maybe better served to publish the 6.8% example than a 5.1%, which gets further away from those that are in that hot spot on the map where their valuations are maybe 7, 8, or 9% up.
Yeah, talk to us more about how you go from 6 to 5.1, Kelly, so that,
Overall versus
Yeah.
So
average.
this is the median valued home, and
The
we get
median
that,
value,
yes. And,
okay.
I'm seeing actually terminology on my slide. This should actually say median, not
Yeah.
average
Yeah.
valued home. So this means half the homes are lower and half the homes are higher. And, then there is the average if you take all of the valuation and you divide it by the number of homes. And
yeah.
so the slide, when we're talking about valuation back there, that number is all of the valuation
Right.
divided. This one is this median valued. This particular metric is something that's used by most cities when they're talking about how does this affect? They're usually using that median valued home. So that is why we use that, because it's just very consistent. It's what's consistent with when comparisons are made. It also tends to, and I think last year was an anomaly, but it does tend to represent more homes, particularly in Burnsville, because we have a lot of
Yeah.
homes in that area. So
Yeah.
it tends to represent
Yeah.
a lot of homes. But yeah, there was definitely a big difference. Another thing factoring in there on those increases were townhomes really increased quite a bit. So again, that was
And condos.
it was skewed. It was skewed within neighborhoods. It was skewed. It was a huge difference. And I think there is a bit of a turn as we were looking at some of them. The compression last year also seemed to be, the homes below the median or right around the median are approaching the homes on the higher end that were not changing very much. And so there wasn't very much difference between some homes that were, the compression just was closer. And then we actually are seeing this year, there was some more growth on the other side of it. So sometimes it's a year-to-year difference. That all depends on, that is one of those things really out of our control.
Okay, Dan?
Well, just to follow up, we understand maybe behind the numbers and the terminology of median, average, et cetera, but what I think residents focus in on is the number. If we're gonna publicize a 5.1 in the paper as the median, and there are people out there in homes where it goes up 7.5%, 8%, because there has to be some in the 6.8 number, they get really like, wait a minute, you were way off, right? So personally, it would be my recommendation that we use the 6.8 number, because it really better represents where you're either gonna be above it or below it. A 5.1 number against this 6.8 tells me there's a lot more of them that are gonna be higher than the 5.1, and so we're gonna have a repeat of last year's sort of setting an expectation and then finding there's a lot of people that are way off of that. So personally, I would say the valuation of your home, on average, in the entire city went up 6.8. You could be different up or down of that, instead of using the median price 5.1, because that's what everyone fixates on.
And they'll
We can-
fixate on that $40.
Yeah, and they'll fixate on the 40
That's what
bucks.
they're gonna really look
The
at.
6.8 might be 58 or 60 bucks, and it's at least a little closer to their reality when you anticipate more people are gonna be on the high side of that 5.1, which they have to be because the whole city's at 6.8, right?
It actually could be mathematically a little different, because
Agreed.
if the higher valued homes are increasing more, their percentage is
Right,
going to
they're
be
pulling that
higher, and
up,
if you apply that to the whole, it mathematically,
So can we just ask staff to really look at how that should be messaged and what's the best way to message it so that it is transparent and clear, but not playing with any of the numbers? So I would suggest that we let our staff do the work that needs to be done and come back to us with, But the goal is that how can we communicate to our residents clearly what that expectation might be? Yeah, Dan?
The other thing too is just how do we approach it? I mean, using what we have in the past kind of creates more scenarios like last year. Using a 6-8 number, maybe in your theory, if there was a lot of higher end homes that pulled it up, that means people will be pleased when they see their bill
It's
and they were
less.
actually lower than that.
Yeah, yeah.
I would rather have that than a repeat of last year where people were scanning tax bills and sending to me, and they, Councilmember Schultz was saying that, like, she got a lot of calls where you said this, and it's way higher than that, right? And then we're explaining essentially what we're explaining tonight. We're just using the wrong, in my opinion, the barometer that we advertise,
Yeah.
that people then measure us against, right?
Yeah, okay. Staff just come back to us with a better messaging, and I think the other critical information is there's a difference between appraised value of a home and the assessed value.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
Maybe Marty could make Budget Man.
yeah,
Budget man,
yeah.
Give me a number that.
what does that costume look like?
That's up to him.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
So we move on to some actual numbers here as we're looking at what the projected cost pressures are before additions. And as I keep saying, there's more specific work that needs to be done. These are preliminary estimates of cost pressures for the next year. But operations at current service levels are projected to need an increase of $1,730,000. We have some offsetting revenue sources that would offset that, and then also looking at capital funds and debt service. Those are plans the council has put in place and has some commitments to. We add all those things up, and then the EDA levy, that comes up to a 6% increase, about $2.1 million.
And Kelly, last year when you had your projections for this year, what was that?
It was 4.9.
4.9, what we had,
Last year, we had more flat revenues.
yeah,
We did not have the AIM Center increase.
yeah. Your projections for the 2020 budget.
Oh,
was
the
n-
2020.
That was not 4.9. For the 2020
No.
budget last year, your projection was,
I'm going to have to get back to you on that. I
yeah,
don't
because I think it was in this range.
It was high. It was high.
It was
We-
high.
It
It
was
was
high.
in this range, so it's not a surprise for me to see this because last year, your projections for 2020, because you do a 5-year budget. So,
Yes, what's new is that we were not counting on that much offset on the revenue sources. We're typically conservative when we're estimating how much increase there will be on the revenue sources. We had not, this factors in compensation study
yeah,
increase.
yeah,
And it did have the increase for the AIM Center debt service.
yeah, that was anticipated. Because that's not new
Yep.
information.
No, you are correct. So the next couple of slides just provide some more detail of those line items that on this higher level slide. So when we're looking at general fund current service levels, the general fund is mostly employee services. That is where the expenditures are. That is where the increases are as well. And then current expenditures, I have a projection in here at 3%. We've had some specific things that have been added, but there's also more inflationary pressures in our current expense area. We have some needs in our salt and ice control kinds of things. There's just a little bit more in that area. And then the increase in the revenue sources is explained on this page. At this point, projecting our revenue sources for most revenues to be pretty flat. We do have License and permits have been going well. We did expect a little bit of that in last year's budget increase. And then charges for services, which is EMS charges as well. We will hone in on those numbers better over the next couple of months as well. But we do like to be conservative on those because those are, we don't want to count on them too much. And then they're out of our control to a certain degree. Intergovernmental goes down because we did still have a tail on the SAFER grant and a couple other minor changes. So SAFER grant was still funding part of our firefighters for SAFER program last year. So that is, and that's planned funding that will need to be filled.
Yeah, Dan?
And we may end up having as we dig into some of these other numbers, there may be little ups and downs there, but I don't really foresee like big numbers coming in on anything else.
Okay, Dan?
Thank you.
Okay.
Since you brought it up, I wanted to highlight the season we just left not long ago and compliment Ryan and the entire Public Works
yeah.
for an exhausting year of repeated ice and snow and problems, and which exhausted the majority of all of our sand and salt for the most part, and you need to restock. So we have to do what we need to do to restock and get ready for another year. But what a rough year, and how phenomenal the staff, and I didn't get hardly any complaints, and I was watching and just amazed at how well you and the entire crew managed keeping those roads safe and clear with this just constant, revolving door of storms coming through, and fantastic job. It was got to be the most challenging year, and I think it was one of the best shining examples of how to do it right. So, compliments.
Dan G?
I'd like to echo that as well. That was pretty amazing. But I do have a question. We have a number of charges for services. What are the services we charge for? And I don't need a complete list, but examples of what that is.
Well, the EMS is the largest one.
Okay, so this is some of the public safety stuff, and then, all right.
Yeah. So ambulance.
Ambulance service is
Ambulance
expensive.
service. We also have the second largest is charges to our projects for our engineering time. So our staff time that the general fund pays for, and then all of the ancillary overhead costs to doing that. So if we hired out consultants, we would pay those out of the projects. This is the staff time being paid out of those projects. So it's really it's a revenue between funds.
So we charge for helping with that project. And what does the license and permits pay for then?
License and permits are community development permit fees that are for building permits. Generally, there's other licenses as well, but generally building permits.
And it pays for staff?
And then on charges for services also, you would have things like recreation fees, you would have fees for special police, overtime, contracted services, anything in your fee schedule kind of that we're charging for.
Okay, thank you.
So if I could just real quickly, and we're not gonna get in the weeds on this today by any stretch, but the charges for services and the building permits, that has a direct impact on the staff time that is needed. So we're looking through a couple different scenarios on how to address that, so we've got a long-term sustainable plan for how we operate. So this is just one side of the coin.
Yes. And then your capital funds, so I flipped too quickly. The capital funds these are as were in the plans, the financial plans for how much increases in those funds as well.
Could you,
Yeah.
apologies. Thank you. Just wanted to
Yeah.
check it. Thank you.
We
here.
need to fund the parks. We have not funded them for years, and we're trying to backfill. And I don't know about you all, but I hear from our residents, the quality of those equipment need to be replaced because they are, I think it's risky, some of that equipment. It needs to be replaced. And I think Ryan,
Yep, the park equipment does age, and there's all kinds of new standards that we always have to lead up to and match when
Yeah.
when they need to be replaced. So it's surprisingly expensive on some things.
and I have to commend you, Ryan, and our park staff with trying to use the funds that we give you, but also having, asking for funds. For instance, Lions is now help with the pickleball court. We're doing the park for the handicapped children
Red Oak, yep.
at Red Oak. And so if you look at all of the money that Lions is putting in to help us backfill the park's needs,
Skate
that
park.
hasn't been done.
Skate park would not be there
That's right.
but for the Lions.
So that needs to happen from the rest of the community, that $50,000. And we need to make sure, that's a need, that's not a want. That's a need that needs to happen.
If I
Kara?
May I ask, so, just so I'm understanding this, you're saying that there is equipment that Parks is using that is placing our employees at risk?
No, not our employees, our children.
There is equipment in our parks that is placing our children at risk? Is what is being said?
They are old,
I did not see that.
aged, and they need to be replaced. Melanie?
Well, here's what I'll say, Madam Mayor and council members. I think typically we've got a analysis process for our park equipment that we go through and make sure. I think to Ryan's point and to the mayor's point, as things age and when you choose to replace them, codes are different and we have different parameters to meet. But I don't think they're not hazard equipment.
They're not
Not
going to.
hazardous equipment. It's just they're due for replacement.
Yeah. Ryan?
Yeah, we have an inspection process where they're out there, I believe, weekly, checking on the different playground equipment to ensure that it's not a
Going
known
to collapse.
risk or, yes, exactly, that they are not, we don't have a known problem. If there was a known problem that we'd be putting someone at severe risk because of failure, we would make the playground be off limits.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just wanted to
It's just,
clarify
it's just wearing
that.
out and.
It's
time
wearing
for
out
replacement.
and it needs to be replaced. And I have walked through some of those parks with the residents says, this is, and I said, yes, we're working on all of that. And yes, we're funding the parks capital plan. Yes, we need to make sure that the equipment's are, I said, but there is a plan on how this equipment gets replaced. So we can't replace them all at the same time, but I said our staff has a replacement schedule on hand. So they do have that. And I think Dan Kay and I went on a parks tour, and we have seen Sue Fisher Park. Those need to be replaced, those dugouts. Woke Park, oh my God, that's awful. I'm sorry, it is awful, and we're replacing that this year. Yeah, so,
Did you see your budget report on, or the item for replacement of the dugouts that came in well under bid, so.
yay!
Yeah, I know, so we had some positivity there. So,
Yeah,
yep.
good, thank you. Yeah. And then the infrastructure trust fund, boy, that's one of the highlights where we pay go and we don't have to bond for those except for the assessments that we have out.
Yep.
Use 429.
And I will actually be talking about that in a future slide that we probably will be presenting our out years as more of a percent increase versus the $50,000 increase. So the increase annually has been a flat $50,000 for quite
Yeah.
a number of years. And costs are going up and that sort of, just to keep pace, we want to do that more as a percentage increase. But that doesn't need to happen this year. For 2020, we're still in good shape.
Okay.
Okay. So this slide just talks a little bit about while revenues are up as we talked about, in EMS and permits, there are service impacts associated with those increases, and we've not included those in these projections. Staff will be addressing these areas in the proposed budget and would be on top of the 6% increase, but the EMS has been going up very steadily for quite a number of years. And we've really reached a high level of overtime and ability to, a reduced ability to schedule leave time. And the increased volume does not seem to be leveling off. So some issues there. And the permit revenue also has been now a number of years, and it's a council priority to continue with your economic development activities. And so those kinds of things will continue to increase, and we want to make sure that we are at the right service level so we're able to respond to that, and so that we aren't issuing permits and then they have to wait too long to get that actual permit inspection. So I don't know if you have anything to add on that, Jenny.
No, but we're focusing, I'll tell you right now, we are about 3 weeks out for commercial plan review, and we try to make residential a priority. We're 2 weeks, at least 2 weeks out. We are about 2 weeks out for someone to schedule an inspection right now. So it's we're really busy. We are maxed out, and there aren't really consultants that we can use, and so the staff we're doing the best that we can at that peak time that we're at right now.
So,
Dan?
I just wanted to ask, I don't have anything to compare that to other than maybe our history. At this booming economic time, it's booming extra nice for Burnsville because of our building, et cetera. How does that 2-week turnaround compare to other cities? Are we now getting to where we're becoming the city that is waiting too long? Or are we, consistent with other cities where we're at least competitive in our turnaround time? How does that relate?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Madam Mayor, members of the
Jenny.
council, I don't know at this moment. I think one of the things we thought that would be a good follow-up to our comp study is a staffing study, right?
Yeah.
Compared, so we can have those numbers relative to others. But, if somebody's off for summer vacation, it delays people because we don't have backups. And so it's really problematic when we've been running bare bones for so long to provide the level of customer service that I think you may want us to do, so.
When we were at our all-day work session, one of the things that I put on the table, and Melanie and I have talked about it, are we staffed right for what we have done? Because we've cut a great deal when we went through the recession, but now we're coming up where we have a lot of work. Are we staffed right to make sure that we meet those needs? So that we are, and then I said, I don't know that. You all have to tell us what your staff needs are. And that has a direct correlation to our budget and what that means. So we need to understand, if we want a better turnaround, are we staffed right for it? Okay, Dan?
I agree with you, Madam Mayor. Staffing is an issue. I'm curious, do we do any cross-training, because we have a fair amount of enforcement inspectors as well? Are they qualified to go in and look at buildings for final inspections, or is that too specialized?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, I believe with our
State law.
comp study, they're at different pay levels, so there's that issue, and there is a qualification issue. They have to have
State law.
building inspector or building official certification to do certain inspections. Some of them can do some of the more simpler inspections under the watch of the building officials. So there is I would say there's some things maybe that they can do, but certainly not like specialized plumbing and mechanical
No,
building.
that part, I just wonder sometimes if we can't just, on days when you are down, that you can't grab someone from the others and say, you need to go out and look at this, and if that's even a acceptable.
Well,
Yeah.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, it's peak time for weeds, it's peak time for code violations, so there is nobody to grab. At summertime is peak time all around, so.
I get we're
Yeah.
struggling, but, sometimes cross-training kind of helps move things around at certain times. I'm not
Okay.
telling you how to do your job, just kind of thinking it through is
Sure.
how do we best utilize our staff in different areas
Quicker
if we can.
permits or less focus on
So-
weeds.
Okay, Kara?
Maybe weeds could be a lower priority.
Because we have the mayor as backup. She's gonna pinch hit, and
Shove a weed.
we just get the right equipment for it.
Yeah,
We budget a wheelbarrow.
We have
Yeah,
the
yeah.
equipment.
yeah, oh, God. Hey, listen, okay, Kara, were you done with your comment, or?
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not denigrating everything, I'm just saying that maybe we need to relook at priorities again, because if we have things that are lagging, because our people are doing not the best, highest use of their time, but because we're directing them to spend their time on that, that's on us, and maybe we need to take another look at that.
On the economic development, because that's what's driving it on Jenny's side.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yeah,
Danji.
I'm all for putting them more onto the economic development. Yes, I'm for that.
Well, I felt it should be said, as someone who has constantly driven down and driven the efficiency initiative, put it that way, and that to keep this city lean and mean. We've successfully done that for many, many years. At the same time, when we have this economic boom, I'd be nuts to say, try and figure it out with what you have. It makes no sense. So there's no question that we need to put resources in there to handle this workload. Whether it was, I think some of our initial thoughts were go to a consultant because we just don't have any idea how long our little boom, our mini boom is gonna last, because we don't really have a lot of vacant property. So it's only gonna go so long, and then it's gonna tail off. However, there was a point made by, I think, City Manager Lee possibly, or even yourself, Ms. Faulkner, that it's a lot less costly to take on an employee. And then in the reality, if this mini boom goes for 3 years and then it tails off, you just cut that person. And that was a lower cost alternative than saying, let's go to a consultant for this boom, not knowing how long it'll last, because you're gonna spend a lot more on a consultant for that period of time. So I would leave it up to staff to make that decision, but along with that, just as a general, that I couldn't help but compliment Councilmember Augustus on his good conservative-based policy of
very
cross-training
conservative,
and
as you
using
know.
resources, but,
Hurt his soul.
I couldn't believe you said that. I was like grinning ear to ear that you would say that. But that a use of a consultant in other areas to free up time on people who are cross-trained to help fill a gap. I mean, I think that's up to you, and I agree with Councilmember Schultz. If everything's a priority, then nothing's a priority, and you can't get to everything. But economic development, to me, I mean, weeds are important, and the maintenance of our city is important. I don't know that we really are going to sacrifice a tremendous amount. This is the area that is fueling our growth, that is fueling the increased tax base, that is going to give us levy pressure relief. And so I'm all in for the ED, because I want to ride it as high as we can and do what we need to do to be able to successfully execute on it, because it comes back in return on investment. These new properties coming on are going to deliver a couple years down the road the city property tax revenue that we're looking for to give us future relief from a 4.9 to 6.0 potential levy, which is, to many of us, is like, yikes. But I had a feeling that we'd have that for a year or two before that payoff came, right? That we do have to staff up and invest up, and then we're going to get, in 2 years, and for a period of several years, we're going to get some significant relief on the levy because of this added tax value. So it is what it is. It's just how the game is played. There's no way for us to time, because of that 2-year delay, there's no way for us to get the ROI any faster than what we're getting.
I first want to just actually thank staff, because you do cross-train. It's not that they don't. They cross-train on everything. You look at our fire. Our fire is fire EMS. Those guys are cross-trained. We are one of the few cities who do that. Other cities have people who are just paramedics, and then there's fire. And I know that Jenny cross-trains in her department. So they do cross-train. Ryan does the same thing in his, and in all of our departments, they're very good at what they do and how we have, as an organization, have a very lean and mean way of delivering service for the cost to our citizens. And that's because they do a great job in continuously improving from a staff development perspective, but also cross-training. So I want to acknowledge that you do that, Jenny, and it's not that you don't, so.
Yeah, I'm not accusing them of not cross-training. It was simply a question of, can we do something like that?
Yeah.
But I do disagree with you on one thing. I don't think this is a mini boom. I think the city of Burnsville's in a redevelopment mode, and we're gonna be here for a long, long time with the zoning changes
Yeah.
we're making and the height development things we've done, and there's a lot going on, and I think it's gonna continue to do so. So I think this is a long-term thing. So the goal of hiring someone maybe 3 years from now, they'll go away, I don't think they will, because we're gonna probably need them 3, 4, 5, 6 years from now, because it's gonna keep moving.
Sure, and
Yeah.
the mall, and I was thinking vacant land, but the
No.
mall redevelopment
The
is gonna be a
redevelopment is the
10-year
big piece.
process.
We got all these
so-
single-story buildings that are
Yeah.
ripe for something much
So,
bigger.
yeah, because when we talked about this stuff during an all-day work session, if you didn't imprint in your brain what the plan is for the Burnsville Shopping Center and the 42 corridor, that's a huge project in redevelopment, and it's mixed use. So there's a lot of work, and that's why I said, Jenny, tell us what your staff needs are. And we need to understand so that we can plug it into the budget. Okay, Melanie?
So, thank you, Madam Mayor and council members. With all due respect to Councilmember Keeley, I don't know that I ever said we'd hire somebody and then cut bait 3 years later, or
Yeah,
cut them
yeah,
loose 3 years
yeah.
later, so.
Yeah.
You can't do that.
I think we have a different approach to our
Yeah.
staff, but I do understand what you're saying, but, I think, we're in a good place, and this is a staff that's continually evolving and, actually looking at how to provide those services to meet the council's needs, so, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go back, and so we can stay on track with our budget discussion. And Kelly?
Okay. Just briefly on utilities, we are doing a comprehensive utility rate study. We do a rate study every year, where we're looking at, we've done that every year. This is a deeper, rate study. It's looking at the structure of the rates. What should the base rate be, and what should the per gallon rate be? We haven't raised that base rate in a long time. We haven't really done the whole, what should be covered by the fixed part and what should be covered by the variable part? How does conservation go with that? And so we've begun that. Ryan and Ms. Rhodey are working on that, and it'll be a couple-year process,
Yeah.
actually, but we'll see part of it as this. I don't anticipate this being something where we are changing the whole amount of money that's collected. It just might be how the rate structure is. So, and then we just, in utilities, the renovation identified some operational needs for long-term maintenance, and the budget process and the rate study will ensure the sustainability of this fund. The EDA fund. So last year, you put in place your economic development strategy, and when we did that, it was funded mostly with fund balance. We increased the EDA levy to a $35,000 increase annually. Previously, you had $25,000. But we knew, and that was the way the 5-year plan was presented, that we were drawing down fund balance to do operations at this level. So what I wanted to point out to you was that that will not be sustainable in the long term if this is going to continue. So we're looking for some direction on where you want to go with this. So it's okay to use that fund balance for a period of time as we kind of are figuring out how it's going. But just knowing that we will reach a point where we we can't. So you can see in
Yeah.
2024, we are down to the end. And really, we're going below fund balance. Your fund balance policy in this fund is just like any other fund. It's 35% of next year's budget. So you really end up going below fund balance policy at that point. So if you were to increase the levy to sustain the fund, it would go something like this. And this is just if we were to go up 150,000 in the Economic Development Authority, absent any other additional spending, that's what this fund would look like. It would be back to providing some funds within the fund to be able to do other economic development activities as well. So
That's like less than 0.5%.
Yeah.
That's about
because-
0.5%,
Yeah, about
yeah.
0.5%,
yep.
because 365 is 1%.
And then this slide shows you what the capacity is. So the EDA levy does have a statutory limit. It is a % of market value. And so the blue is what you're levying now. As I looked at my notes, I shouldn't have added the 150 to the current year because we're obviously not changing the levy in 2019. So that just really should be the added capacity. Should be green in 2019 instead of red. But if we added the 150 for the next few years, that shows you what that uses up of your capacity for the EDA levy. The green part being what would be available for other priorities of the EDA levy. You've talked about some things like the housing fund, the housing loan program funding, other things to do with the Economic Development Authority levy. So just,
Yeah, Dan?
Should we do something at that level? What does that leave us to operate with? I mean, because we have certain salaries come out of, there's things that are just committed out of the EDA already. And so what would that leave us where we'd have funds to actually do some
well, really it's
with.
that available levy max for each of those years.
Green.
So in
The green.
2020, 291,000. So the numbers below.
Okay, oh, okay.
Yeah,
That's a general estimate, and it also, we haven't gone through and put in all of the details for the actual expenditures and projections for the EDA levy. That's what is happening in the next couple of months. So this is it's a rough estimate for you, but it just gives you sort of order of magnitude 300,000.
Thank you.
Melanie?
Kelly, of that 742,500, if I look at 2019, how much of that, do you know roughly, or you or Jenny know, how much of that is like those staff costs that are fixed costs that we are currently kind of committed to?
Remember, so it's two positions, staffing wise.
So those are kind of our committed costs within that levy. Is that what the question you're
That,
asking?
I think we also have money coming out of there for the
Salary and benefits.
Performing Arts Center
I was
as
gonna say,
well.
there's AIM Center debt,
Yep.
oh,
Yeah.
thank you. Should turn to Jenny on my right.
The one that runs the department does.
She's on it. She's like,
Here's how much money we get to.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have, so about 270,000 is staffing costs. And we have marketing consultant for, in there. There's the ED conferences, staff attendance, greater MSP, MCCD. Oh, we don't do greater.
There's no more
MSP.
greater MSP.
Still in my title, but yes, so, yes. Current expenditures, just other current expenditures. There are some other things that are, have been identified, like retail analytics, some other professional services, your center village, EAW and design guidelines, housing rehab loans. There's lots of things
There's a
on
lot.
the.
Yeah,
There's a lot of
Jenny?
potential.
Yeah, there
There's a lot of
is a lot.
potential.
Yeah, Jenny.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, the initial numbers that Kelly talked about do not include some of these things that she just mentioned, right? So that's not in that 6%. I just want you to know that. So if we want to do something with housing loan programs, the CDA has said they have capacity to fund 5 of those, up to 35,000. That's
And that comes out of our CDBG funds, some of that.
In addition, if
In
we want to
addition,
go above and
that's right.
beyond, that would be $175,000, for example. That's not in the levy numbers that Kelly's talking about. Neither is 42 Center Village, EAW,
Yeah.
and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That's well into 6 figures. So there are several things
Yeah.
that we plan to bring forward that will probably be on top of what you're already seeing to fund your economic development plan, to keep that going, so we can continue down that path. So I just want you to know there's more to come on that.
Thank you.
And it's not an unlimited pot of money. That's the other piece of that.
Sorry, I forgot to turn it off.
But we do
everybody call
also
Elizabeth.
have some other strategies in our back pocket on some of those too, so. Okay. And then this is just a reminder of, some of the projects that will need to be funded, also, or could be funded if that is your priority.
If I can add to that, Kelly. So this is from our Center Village plan, where we identified $23 to $31 million of CIP items. Those have not been put in yet.
Yeah.
We think it's a little premature yet until we get some of these other things going, like the EAW. City engineer Des Rude's working on the traffic study right now, so that's gonna help inform some of the CIP stuff. So we expect that to be forthcoming. Probably not for 2020, but we need to start thinking
Yeah.
about this and how we're gonna pay for
Yeah.
this if we wanna keep these things going and make change happen. Thank you.
I'll move through some of these a little bit more quickly here. The Infrastructure Trust Fund, I just wanted to bring that to your attention. We're maintaining that fund balance. In 2023, we'll dip down a little bit, but that's more of a plan. It dips back up. I guess it doesn't dip up, does it? It goes back up. But as I mentioned earlier, we are thinking about raising that from a $50,000 flat increase to a percentage increase in the future years. Facilities Capital Fund. So the Facilities Fund has 2 major funding sources, and that was changed last year. Those funding sources were swapped out when the host fees became less reliable or predictable. So now it is host fee and franchise fee. And when we did that, we put into the out year that we would, to continue that funding, we'd probably need to have another funding source, which we just showed a placeholder of increasing franchise fees. And you've had some discussion about whether that is something that you want to pursue. Franchise fees. So what's the difference between franchise fees and property tax? It's a different method of collecting revenues. It is definitely a lot of the same people that you're collecting revenues from, but it's a flat fee on utility meters. But it does have some differences. It starts as soon as the property is in service versus a time lag on new construction. So it is a method of collecting that a little bit sooner. Fiscal disparities do not impact these fees. So if we're to raise the levy, we contribute some of that to fiscal disparities pool, and all of franchise fees collected in Burnsville are spent in Burnsville.
Yeah.
So I think that's one positive factor. All properties pay the fee versus some properties being tax exempt. So there are fees for nonprofits and other governments and that. And they are using services within Burnsville. So this is, you've dedicated the facilities or the franchise fee to facilities replacement needs, which support general services received by all property owners. The fee policies to be in the upper quartile. So we were looking at what are other franchise fees in other cities and how do we compare. The council direction was to discuss increasing the franchise fees. If we do, the timeline to implement would be that we would need to update some agreements on our franchises. There's some just time to publish and do some of those things, so that's about 90 days to implement the change. It can really start any time. It's not something that has to start first of the year. It can start before that, it can start after that. But something to consider. If franchise fees, so I guess there's a question, does franchise fees replace property taxes? I think in the case of the facilities fund, it replaces future need for property taxes. So absent franchise fees, when we build the fire station and we need to fund the debt service on that, and then phase 3 or also some other facilities needs, you could think of it as replacing future. There's also some property tax relief options. You could pay down outstanding debt on the ice center, so you're eliminating that annual use of the general fund balance for a few years. It provides you general fund balance capacity. You could redirect host fees to property tax relief, so future host fees, if the agreement to expand the landfill were to go through and you have additional host fees, they can go elsewhere, which can offset property taxes. And it could be used to pay off debt on the maintenance facility or fund the Ames Center debt. So those are all things that could happen that would have a different net effect. Then just to show you what other similar cities are charging on their franchise fees, we are the lowest. So we are definitely not in the upper quartile. We are the lowest. The residential gas and electric, so there's a $1 on gas meter and a $1 per month on the electric meter. So that's $2. So the upper quartile, just from this, is somewhere in the neighborhood of $7 to $10 for residential. The commercial's a little bit harder to, they're kind of varying amounts, but we can come up with something and do some projections on that, if that is the direction that you would like to go.
Dan?
I hear conflicting things about franchise fees and what they can and can't be used for. Are we open to use it for pretty much anything, or are we limited into what it is?
So your policy, the city's policy,
Yeah.
just use it for facilities.
I understand the policy, but I hear conflicting things about just state statute on it.
Oh, we're within state statute on what we use it for. A lot of cities will use it for things having to do with roadways. But we have the infrastructure trust fund that's funding that. So that's why when we implemented it for facilities piece of it. There was some discussion in legislative discussion about whether that, franchise fees are something they were going to continue to allow or not, and nothing went with that.
Just to answer your question, the reason why we look at facilities is because all of our facilities need to be updated or redone, like this building needs to, police, and now we need fire. The Ames Center is 10 years old, and we're going to be looking at probably roof, we need carpeting, we need the water facilities, the plant. Is that some things at the water plant that needs to be updated and also remodeled? Is that the surface plant or the ground plant that needs to, Ryan?
At the water plant, that would all be just our sewer and water
Just
utility.
as, okay, so
This-
that's not going to come out of the
No.
facilities.
Maybe she should answer you.
Yeah, so the utility fund, the water and sewer utility with the utility fees, that is paying for all of those utilities. The general maintenance of, the other enterprise fund buildings, so the Ames Center and the, Ice Center, golf course, they're paying their general maintenance kinds of things, but when it comes to, a
Capital.
big thing, like
Yeah.
a roof,
Yeah.
like the ice plant was, those things become, funding, general property tax funding or some kind of general government funding. So
Yeah.
that's where that fund, we're limiting to that sort of thing.
Okay.
So,
Kara.
just so I make sure I understand the graph, we are the lowest on franchise fees, except for our comparable cities that do not charge them.
That's
So
true.
they're actually the lowest because it's 0.
That's true,
But out of cities that do charge it, we are the lowest,
yes,
correct? Okay.
Yes.
Wanted to make sure I had that.
yes.
Okay.
Dan,
You remember a question I asked last year? You may remember I inquired, for every dollar of franchise fee raised, what is the equivalent in a levy?
I do remember the question. I don't remember the answer off the top of my head, but, it is, something that we calculated, the equivalent of, it is a flat rate, so it's not the same. So when we look at, like, we can calculate what a median value home would be, it would be different for a $150,000 home, it'd be different for a $450,000 home. The difference, but
I remember
rate
the
is-
majority was, it came down to, for every dollar that we collected in franchise fee, it was a corresponding $1.41 reduction in the levy. So a dollar raised here lowers a $1.41 over here. So it was a significant
Amount.
difference, because it was, as you noted, 100% of the properties in Burnsville pay the franchise fee. And what I liked about our use of that being facilities, 100% of the people who own property or live in a property or work in a property use water, roads, infrastructure, and that's what City Hall core, fundamental services is delivered. So I was a big fan of the franchise fee as a mechanism to lower the levy pressure, because everybody pays and everybody uses what that fund provides. So I'm okay with looking at increasing it, because I know it's gonna have a significant impact, beneficial impact on our levy.
So Counselor Gustafson asked, but I didn't hear a clear answer. Legally, what can you use a franchise fee for? Anything? Everything?
I don't think it's everything.
yeah.
No, I think our limitation, we'll
Yeah.
get back to you on the
Yeah.
specifics of that.
And I
though, to
think
make
we
sure
need
You
to-
know what those parameters are, but I don't have that for you tonight.
Thank you.
I can tell you that this is a fee that we have the authority to use right now. But we do have some legislators who are saying they're gonna take that authority away. So which means we won't have any other resource except the property tax to fund a lot of the things that we're doing. So as long as we can use this tool at this time, I believe that we should, because everybody pays to ensure that we get some of the things that we need to get done without impacting the property tax. Everybody pays that. This, everybody pays. So, and I don't know how much longer we can use this tool, because there has been conversations at the legislature, and I was present at some of those, where they're wanting to take this away. So,
That's the scary part about it. You
Yeah.
implement it, and then 2 years from now, it goes away, and we've been counting on it, and
well, but the thing is, if we have it, then let's do the things that we need to get done.
I hear you.
I think one of the benefits of it being in the capital fund
Yeah.
That if it were something that were to go away, is something that we
You can
can
schedule.
manage the reintegration of it without being, if you were paying personnel costs and those
Yeah.
kinds of things, you don't have the ability to
Yep.
to change the timing of those.
That's right.
So, and one of the biggest things that you have in your facilities fund is the replacement of Fire Station 1.
That's right,
Which
and
we're
that's
planning
big.
bonding. If you raise the franchise fees and pay for more of that with cash, you're lowering your interest costs.
And at this
so-
time, with the prices continuing to go up in materials, it's best for us to do it early than later. And we need to consider all of those things. You had a comment?
Now, part of this, I know a lot of this is for the fire station and all of our buildings but aren't we kind of also looking at part of this that we're anticipating the possibility of our host fee going away someday? And we want to get that out of our general fund for everything so that we're not counting on that. We can use it for other things and.
So the host fee is out of the general fund now,
Yeah.
into the
Totally.
into the facilities
There you go.
fund.
Yeah.
And we are, in our facilities fund plan, we are counting on 3 years' worth of host fee, because that's the current capacity.
Yeah.
Whether the timing comes in, I guess my slide here, what I was pointing out here is how the timing comes in on that. Right now, it's actually coming in ahead of plan, but that just means that the
Getting nailed
capacity
with
is getting
trash right
used
now.
up faster, which might be on the back end. Or it could change,
Yeah.
it could cut off quickly too, so. But yes, if, right now, that fund is not planning on host fee. The swing thing in that particular fund will be bonding and how much
Yeah.
we bond for that facility. And bonding is okay for that facility because that is a facility that's going to be used in the future, so, you wanna, for the most part, tax future taxpayers for the future use of that building as opposed to necessarily taxing current and saving up a lot of money and paying for that, because they're not the current, they won't be the users of it. So it makes sense to do bonding on that kind of a project. But it also makes sense to have some cash paid for it as well and reduce your interest costs. So there's
That's right.
balance there.
Yeah. And it helps to reduce our debt also.
Yes.
Yeah, and so the thing is with the host fees, so we, right now with the agreement we have with Waste Management is the next 3 years. But if you remember, their plan before us is to go 30 more years. So
If that
let's
happens.
not, well, they're going through the whole process,
I know,
but
I
they
know.
came and we gave them the concept approval to move forward. So it's not that they're gonna go away. They have a 30-year plan that they're going to continue to do that, so they just have to go through their process.
It's best just to get it out of our general fund and we can use it for other
Yeah,
things.
and that's part of what we've been working towards is to get it out.
And if that were to,
Yeah.
if that were to be approved and we have that going in the future, you could use some of that in
Yeah.
the general fund as property tax relief. That was what I was
Yeah.
trying to communicate on that previous slide. If we don't do the franchise fees and we're relying on future host fees in this fund, you don't.
Yeah.
So, so you asked the question, what can we use franchise fees for? We have some more flexibility with the host fees if we're swapping out those, so,
Got it, thank you, that helps.
Okay,
all right?
so are you asking for direction on the host fee then? I mean, on the franchise fee at this time, or are you waiting till the end?
If you'd like to give direction now, you can, or we can wait till the end, either way.
Okay.
There's only a few
You said you were
slides
in
left.
favor of increasing. Okay. Kara?
I am not in favor, I mean, if I need to give the answer right now, I'm not in favor of raising the franchise fees. But I am willing to look at further discussion of moving different revenue mechanisms around So I'm not giving a blanket no, but if you're asking me right now if it's a no, it's a no.
Vince?
I didn't know we were gonna make this decision tonight.
Well, because we have to direct staff.
I had a question I was gonna follow up on my one-on-one, but I can ask it now. Of our levy dollars, how much from property tax is committed to capital improvement projects right now? Or are all of our capital improvement projects funded with the franchise fees?
So, we have,
You thinking roads as well?
No, capital,
So-
facilities.
Facility,
Oh,
okay,
facilities.
just
Sorry.
facilities.
Yeah, I
Yes.
should have.
If capital is like,
I got a lot going on up here tonight,
oh,
so.
Okay.
that's good. Yeah, from property tax, did you say?
Yeah,
So we have most of our facilities, maintenance stuff in the facilities fund, and the revenue sources are the host fee and the franchise fee. So there might be some other things, few other things in other funds that could be directed over there, but not a lot.
so the bulk of our facilities upgrades and replacements are funded with the franchise fees.
Yes.
yeah,
And before we implemented the franchise fees, those were funded with the property
Property
tax?
tax, property tax levy or unfunded. It really became because they were unidentified and unfunded. When we did that facility study that identified, we had these looming big needs, and the police garage, that we built, that was funded from that. So we're paying, debt service on that out of the franchise fees.
So if we didn't increase the franchise fee, it would just delay the projects that we have as part of that facilities.
Yes, there would be,
Master plan,
yes, there would be some delay.
which would increase costs.
It does increase costs.
You go to Gustafson first and come back to me.
okay. Gustafson?
As the
Well,
review.
I will tell you, when I first heard about this, it's called a fee, but I still call it a tax. But as we've been going through the discussions the last few months and talking about moving the host fee out of some of the areas and using the franchise fees for these particular items, which is really, this is all community property, our city hall, our ice arena, the Ames Center, everything we pay for, this is all belongs to the citizens of Burnsville, and it needs to be paid. And I'm intrigued by the idea of, should the 30 years happen with waste management, that we can use that money for pretty much anything we want, where we can't necessarily do that with the franchise fee. So because we're doing a policy of this is really a facilities fee for the city, I can get on board. We just need to figure out the number and how all that's gonna work, and
Yeah.
and how that whole waste management thing's gonna work for us as well.
Yeah, Kara?
So that, what it leads to is actually the further discussion that Kara would like to have.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kara?
And, you know, here's my caution on raising the facilities fees. We'll look at raising the facilities fees, which will probably end up happening. We'll raise the levy. The levy probably won't be 6%, it'll be 7%, because there'll be an EDA vote to go at 1% rather than the 0.1%. So we'll be doing that too. That will continue not just this year, but it will continue then in future years. That will look at raising the levy and going after more franchise fees. And then if we continue to have our host fees, then that's just more money to play with, but not necessarily money to decrease a property tax or decrease the franchise fee with. And because I hear that direction in conversations, like that makes me not on board with raising the franchise fee. Even though if you had asked me, would you do that so that there would be less of a raise overall in property tax to reduce that? Yeah, I would do that. But because that's the direction that I hear, and I'm pretty sure the council will go forward with, you know, I can't in good conscience then say, I'll go along with that. So if that is the direction that council wishes to go, where we keep doing this, I don't know. I guess that's the question I'm asking council is that what we're doing?
Dan?
I'll restate my rationale for wanting to increase the franchise fee. $1 over there reduces the levy by $1.40. I want the reduction in the levy, and I also want everybody in the city to pay for what they're getting. I don't like people or
Not paying.
properties who avoid paying property taxes for a variety of reasons. Have nothing against nonprofits. They use the city services that these facilities provide. Everybody should
Yep.
be paying. And the franchise fee is a mechanism that is focused in that area, and it requires everybody to pay. And it reduces the levy. I agree with you, Councilmember Schultz, the levy looks like it could be as high as a 7. So with this franchise fee increase, whatever it ends up being, it's gonna bring it down. I don't want to, it's not, in my mind, it's not an add-on, right? Okay, we're gonna go 6 plus 1 plus all this franchise fee on top of it. No way, I'm not buying in for that at all. I'm looking for a way to mitigate the levy
Yeah,
So
and,
can I-
and broaden the costs.
yeah.
So are you committing that if it comes before us that we have a levy increase of 6% to 7%, you would vote no?
Well, it won't, I don't believe it's gonna get there because the
I-
franchise fee is gonna lower it if we put that in place. If we don't put the franchise fee increase in place, and we are looking at strictly a 6 or 7, and we didn't give it any relief, then I'm gonna be sharpening the pencil on priorities, because
Okay.
I won't go that high. But there are things that I wanna fund that we talked about. I will do the Parks Capital, we'll do the EDA.
Absolutely.
And if there's other things that, and of course, the employee
Yeah.
compensation, absolutely. I've committed, yes, on camera and
Yeah.
in person, if somebody asked, I will not go back on my word. But that doesn't mean it's a blanket 7%
And we've
approval.
never gone above what staff brings. We always have had them go back and come back with something lower.
Right.
And so that's how it has been. That has been the practice, and they do a good job of sharpening their pencils and come back and say, this is what we can do with what we have. What they're giving us now is their estimate of what is needed. But they always go back and say, here are the things that we can cut, and here are the things that we can work with. So
Can I
I'm going to
finish?
go, finish and then go, and then I'll go to, okay.
Thank you. So there's a list of things and there's a starting point, and this is really at the highest possible level of worst-case scenario in what you articulated, which I agree. As we were conferring, you add it up, it's a 6 plus a 1. My hope is between staff getting into the detail and whatever we ultimately end up with, that is a franchise, that levy number drops down by like 1.5 points from its current 6, that it can get into the 4.5 range, plus the 1 for EDA, and we have the franchise fee. That's, to me, is in a more comfortable range in a year like this. I don't believe we have to do it all at once. I mean, there's a lot of things we want to do, but the capital improvement in EDA, maybe the entire 1% doesn't have to be this year. Because in 2 more years, we're gonna start to see some fantastic relief from property value of new construction that is going to take the pressure off, right? So we have 2 years that we have to deal with significant pressures with no new construction relief before that new construction relief starts to enter into the equation. And so we don't have to just throw it all in this year or in 2020. But there's a few things that I believe in that I think we have to do, that we've got to make, find a way to do, at least from my perspective. But that doesn't mean it's a 7% levy increase.
Was the facilities in that 6-7% you were presenting?
No,
No,
no.
So,
because there's no property tax
right,
levy in
okay.
there.
So if you take away from the levy what we do on the franchise fee, it's cutting other things than services. It's not,
We'd have,
because under that 6 or 7%, there's no facility in there. If we had to add the
Yeah.
facility in there, it'd be more about 9%.
Yeah.
Somewhere in that area. I'm kind of figuring 1.2 million somewhere in that area per year.
yeah, so I guess there's a couple different ways of thinking of it. If we don't raise franchise fees, you'll have to probably raise property taxes within the
Even higher.
facilities fund.
And
So
so you are getting the offset
that we're not
Yeah,
doing
without
that.
taking even more away from the
You would-
levy.
I'm sorry, interrupted.
Kelly?
You wouldn't have to do that necessarily next year.
Right.
You could redirect some other funding. There were some other items, that I mentioned where we could redirect the ice center, the fund balance that we use on the ice center, which then would be available for something else. So we can package a few
We're
of
2
things
years from paying
together.
that off though, right?
Yeah, in
Yeah,
2 years.
but it's still $140,000 a year, so.
I'd like to get rid of that debt.
So there's some things we can package together that they're not, a one for one, but
Yeah.
as we put the whole package together,
Yeah.
we can
Staff can.
try to be creative on some of those things.
And if we say come below the 6, they have done that
Oh, yeah.
in the past. Jenny?
Mayor, members of the council, it might be helpful maybe to go back a couple slides. I'm reading what you
Yeah,
were-
I'm looking at those slides
Thank
right
you.
now.
So these are the things that Kelly talked about, and I'll just point out the one on the EDA levy, Ames Center debt. So
Yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong, Kelly, but, we pay $410,000
Yeah.
is budgeted to pay for that. If you redirect those somewhere else,
Yeah.
then that frees up cash in the EDA levy,
That's
for
right.
example.
And you don't have to raise it, and you keep it at the $35,000
Yeah,
that we have.
the 1/10 of a
But let's
percent
redirect
rather
it
than a
though.
half or a
Yeah.
1, right?
Yeah,
Let's have money in there so we can actually do
0.1%.
something.
Yeah.
okay.
Little by little.
Have you thought through, Vince?
Are we asking about should we or shouldn't we, or are we asking for a specific number on the
Well,
franchise
if we say
increase?
raise it, then staff can come back and say, here's looking and evaluating everything, what that would be.
What the
Not a
impact is.
specific number, just a direction of going up or leave it the same.
I would be comfortable seeing more of an incremental step process than a massive jump, because we're talking about a lot on the
So-
property tax side, and to go big on the franchise fee side simultaneously just seems like we're throwing a lot at people very suddenly.
Okay.
So I'm not opposed to the process of looking at an increase, but I don't know how comfortable I would feel if it was overly aggressive.
Melanie?
So Your Honor and Council, or excuse me, Madam Mayor and Council, one thing to think about as far as the franchise fee is there's a couple different philosophies with that. You can do an incremental annual, and then we have this
Yeah.
discussion
Then,
every
yeah.
year. The alternative would be
Do it once.
you make a larger increase and then you sort of commit to not touching it for the next couple of years, because we know we've got projects for which
Yeah.
we have to pay for. And everything that Kelly and the team is bringing forward tonight is, well, with all due respect, Madam Mayor, we can get down to a lower number, and that's
Yeah.
true for the last 6 months and for longer. The council has had a lot of priorities
Yeah.
for which
Yeah.
a lot of investment, and that's what happens when you have these
Yeah.
these exciting plans that you want to come to fruition.
Yeah.
Is it does take this investment, so I understand it's perhaps outside the comfort level of what we've done in
Yeah.
the past. But just know that, we're not trying to come forward with something that's tremendously unrealistic. We're trying to be responsive to what we've been hearing for the last, for me anyway, for the last 6
Yep.
to 9 months. So, while we will certainly sharpen our pencils, just having a kind of a realistic mindset is helpful as we try to meet your needs.
Yeah, and so from my perspective, I think if to raise the franchise fees, and we do it one time, I don't like coming back again and again. I think we made a mistake in not sizing the franchise fees correctly when we first did it. Because now that we're into it, we know that we need more money when we look at the cost of today's dollar versus tomorrow's dollar and what we need to do. So to increase the franchise fee, everybody pays for the services that these buildings provide, and the buildings are assets that belong to the people. So for me, that's the right thing to do. And Melanie, I agree with you. When we look at all of these priorities, there is nothing that I see on page 25 or whatever, it looks very different here. Anyway, because I think it went from the beginning and it says 248, but that's not correct. But I think it's page 38 of, no, that's not it. But anyway, it's what are the project cost pressures before, that comes out to 6%. When I look at all of that, you have operations, current service levels at 4.8. That's something we have no control. We need to provide the service areas at 4.8. And then you get into the capital fund. That's something we have to do. The Ames Center, that's the abatement levy. That's something we do. So I think it's just directing staff to come back with something else with regard to the levy. I don't know where you will look and sharpen your pencil
Yeah.
with all of that, because this is the first blush, and we always have the first blush. But I think you can take a look at what
You know,
the other costs pressures are. But I think in increasing the franchise fee this year and not touch it again, because we'll have enough. I think when you go back and do the analysis, what's the fee that will carry us with all of the projects that you see coming on? Because for me, it helps reduce our debt. It helps reduce the cost on capital improvement on the property tax. So using this tool allows us to move forward with the things that we need to do and not keep pushing it to future years where that's not responsible government. So you have 3 votes to move forward.
great.
Yeah, and you have one that says incremental, but I would say do it once and then not touch it again. So we not have this discussion, and then it's going to be more for our citizens. But
I did go back to this slide as we talk about the 6% and coming in under
Yeah.
and shaving. It is very difficult, and
Yeah.
and we haven't put in a big.
no,
There's not a cushion in there to do things. So it'll be in the neighborhoods of the 0.1% kind of changes that they'll
Yeah.
make. And that's kind of what you've seen in the past too. That
Yeah.
we don't come in with big pie in the sky kinds of
No, we
things
don't.
in June. We try to remain realistic. So
yeah. Well,
year was really
do
close.
what you can do as we look to the future, but you have some directions with the franchise fee.
and we have just a couple more slides. Fees and charges. I'll skip over that one, but, so the utility funds we're anticipating to be as planned. So I think that's it. And the enterprise funds also, we're not anticipating anything there. So I guess we were at the
Yeah.
question stage.
Yeah. So, let me, council, are there anything else that you want staff to look at for additional items? I don't think you want additional items after listening to the discussion.
Got a plate full right now.
We have a plate full.
We need a water park, don't we?
Go to Bloomington.
Yeah, yeah, no, yeah.
Let's just be like Bloomington did and go to the state and get some state funding to help
Yeah,
pay for
you
it.
know, right now, if our residents are going to Apple Valley, Egan, and Bloomington, so.
Or our lovely splash pad.
Pads,
had
they
my
go to the
grandkids at
heart
the
of the
splash pad
city
over the
and
weekend. It
over
was
to the
fun.
Lions Splash Pad.
Ryan Splish.
Yeah, they go to Lions
was a great
Splash Pad, the heart of the city, Nicollet Commons Park. Yeah, we've got water parks in
That's
Burnsville.
right.
I do have a question, and I'll call this maybe a rookie question, but let's say in 2 years, Kelly or whoever, when all this construction is completed and they're on the tax rolls, are we gonna be met with higher revenue numbers along now with these numbers that we're talking about, and then have a pretty substantial cushion that we're talking about?
So when the property values come on, that affects the tax rate. It doesn't generate any more levy. So
that's
you're,
right.
you'll determine what the levy increase is. That's a set amount. And the valuations are, think of as the denominator in that factor. So how it gets spread out to, so if you have a higher denominator, then you're having a lower amount of property tax to each property. So that's the value of the economic development, and it spreads more. What we can't forget is that more more development also has more services that go along with that sometimes, and needs, and so we just have to be careful with that. But in generally, it's a positive thing. It would generate more franchise fees because there would be more meters. So that would grow with development. It's a flat rate on a meter, but it would be more meters.
So to Kelly's point, in 2 years ago, because all of the development is great, but it also has service costs. So the city of Woodbury tried to impose impact fees. They were taken to court and lost. So for us, we're trying to do things differently, and we've been great with regard to our infrastructure trust fund. And then, of course, doing things with the franchise fees, so we don't have to go down that road. But it's still a discussion among many cities about impact fees, how to cover all of that increased cost. It's no different than a business who expands, and then you've got a lot of overhead costs that you are dealing with, so.
They're volatile, and would hate to be sitting at the table in 2 or 3 years and the legislature's decided to revoke the city's rights to utilize, and we're having
It's a
to
tool we have now, use
rework.
it while we have it.
Yeah. There's a lot of cities that do use it now, and
Yeah.
they would suffer the same thing, worse than
Yeah.
us.
It's no different than TIF when they're trying to also take away TIF. It's a tool we have now, and it's what we can use.
I think it might be likely that they would prevent someone from adding, but
Yeah.
probably not
Take it away
cause
from
us
those who
to
have it.
stop doing the ones that we have.
Yeah.
Maybe
I
kind
mean,
of
I'm not
frozen.
making
Yeah.
any
Yeah, and they may
promises,
cap
but-
us at what the fee is that we have. So that's the other thing. So, yeah. Yeah, Dan.
To your point, Councilmember Workman, I pulled some old charts that showed 2000, who did I share that with? Was it you? 2002, 3, 4? Oh, I think it was Councilmember Gustafson. 2002, 3, 4, when the heart of the city was being built, and the part of the chart back then for the budget,
Yeah.
the new money portion or new construction portion was a nice big part of the bar.
Yeah.
Which is what I'm looking forward to
Yeah.
as we continue to add some more properties on, because that just really lowers that percent growth for everybody. So that's what I was referring to
Yeah.
earlier, is that relief, levy relief from franchise fees today in 2 years, starting for several years, new money coming in.
Yeah.
So,
Like the heart of the city, that 54-acre site, the city was only making $296,000 in property tax. Now we make over $1 million, in property tax. So,
it's been a long wait since those things
Yeah.
were a bigger part of our
Yeah.
pie. It's been like 0.3, 0.2, 0.4.
and we have,
That's gonna be more like 2 and 3%.
so this is all
least 1 or 2.
good. It helps pay for other things as well that are part of our fiduciary responsibility to our citizens.
I
Kelly.
just want to clarify one thing on the heart of the city. That's the TIF value, so that's
Yeah.
we're capturing the county and the school district
Yeah.
portion. So
Yeah.
when it comes back to us, it's just the city portion, when it's decertified.
Yeah.
Just to clarify.
But it still increased, Kelly.
It did, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, the new, because
It-
not everything, I mean, I referenced the heart of the city because it was the
Yeah.
biggest project going, but there's a lot of other projects going on. So that was a lot of new,
Yeah.
fresh money coming into our,
And you can see it
Tax
because we were
revenues.
focused on it. Okay, council, continue service levels as we have it today with staff taking a look at what they need in terms of staffing for future. Okay? Everybody, continue service levels as we have it today? Okay?
Were we gonna discuss, what Jenny was talking about as far as service levels, in the planning department?
That's something Jenny, when she does her analysis, is to come back and say what more staffing level she needs.
Okay.
We're just trying to explain, Councilmember Workman, that there are some other items that, as part of the budget process, we'll be discussing and bringing forward that we don't have totally fleshed out today.
Got it. Okay.
Okay? So, continue with current service levels. And I think we need to continue looking to the future with regard to service levels because of the increase. And so we won't know that, Melanie, and until you all tell us how to staff right for all of that.
Yes,
Yeah.
Madam Mayor. Well, we've got some work to do, of course,
Yeah.
and, you know, our next meeting isn't until, what's,
September 10th.
September 10th, so, that certainly doesn't mean that we won't be talking budget between now and then, so.
Yeah.
More to come.
Yeah.
Much more to come.
Okay. Additional information on council policy decision-making? Anything? Anything? Okay.
Discussion.
I think we have the policies that we have in place, and those are, we heard from our auditor, we have some good policies in place. And in terms of our decision-making with regards to our fiduciary responsibility to the citizens of Burnsville and the expenditure of their money for services and for their assets. So I think you have guidance
Yep.
to increase the franchise fees, bring it back. You all do the analysis and come back, and I only want to do it once. I don't want to do this next year, talking about it again in the fall. Do it once, and then let it sit.
Okay.
Okay, anything else?
Good discussion.
Yeah. Okay, if there is nothing else, we will now move on to our roundtable discussion. So, for roundtable, where's my roundtable?
Last page.
Good job today.
Oh, thank you.
So, the first item on roundtable is our zoning code and integrated use. So when Melanie and I, Skip and Regina were at ICSC, there were emerging trends, and Melanie and I sat in on some of the work sessions about all of that. And what we realized that's emerging in this paradigm shift in retail is that a owner of a retail would like to see within that retail space under one ownership. Maybe retail sales in say clothing, and in that space would be food and beverage, so that people can have something to eat and then also go and shop. So in the same space. And I think for our zone encoding, we need to look at that integrated use. Now, there's a difference because Councilmember Workman had sent at St. Paul, it's called
Keg and case.
Te-
Keg
and
and
case.
case.
Keg and case. It's the
Very
same thing, it's the same concept that is at the old Sears building in Minneapolis, where they have, it's like, it's a shopping center in reality, has one owner, but he or she rents out space like a shopping center. And so you can have restaurants, and you can have food, and you can have dry goods, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like a shopping center use. But maybe you can take a look. And so for roundtable, our roundtable discussion is to ask the council, if we could direct staff to look at our zoning code and integrated use and to bring that information back to us so that we could make an amendment to our zoning ordinance. Would you be open to directing staff to begin that work? Jenny?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, I would just say that it's already allowed by our zoning ordinance.
We can do integrated
So
use
when-
owned by one,
The zoning ordinance doesn't look at ownership, right? So it looks at land uses. So when you look at our commercial zoning districts, it says the uses permitted are one or more of the following. So when somebody comes in and we look at a land use, if office is there, office warehouse is a good example of that. Office and warehouse is allowed. A strip mall, retail, and the restaurants are allowed. So it doesn't matter where the walls, interior walls are per se, when we look at what land uses are permitted. Certainly it matters under the building code and liquor licensing and whatnot, but from a zoning standpoint, I don't see that there's any major issues with a keg and case wanting to come here, for instance.
because one of the things that will be impacted if you're going to have a dress shop and you want to sell spirits and food, now you have sack and whack charges and other, and you're going to have a buyer's license from the state and all of those other things. So that's a different process.
Correct.
But from a zoning perspective, that's allowed at this time, those integrated use under one ownership.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, it would be as it's called out in the ordinance. So if something's permitted under the permitted use category, any combination of those would be permitted, because it says one or more of the following
Yeah,
uses.
they just have
If
to,
if it's combined with conditional, well, then they'd need a conditional use permit, right? So if it's auto repair with the bakery, we saw that a few weeks ago. That
Yeah.
was the auto repair that was
Yeah.
triggering the
Yeah.
CUP, not so much the bakery,
Yeah.
right? And that's how we interpret our zoning ordinance. So
Okay.
I'm happy to look at, we'll be up, our good news, if I can, our comp plan is nearly approved by the Met Council, should be by
Yeah.
the end of the month. Next step is to look at the zoning ordinance and the map for compatibility. We certainly can look and see if we think there's any obvious things that we need to fix, and Regina can look at that with
Yeah.
our TOD ordinance. So we can do that, but I think we're pretty
We're
much good to
good?
go for the integrated land use concept that you speak
Oh.
to.
good, and integrated use, so that's good. I just wanted to make sure that we are ahead of some of these trends that are coming. I'm gonna go to Karen and then to you.
I love what you're talking about and hearing about those trends and that type of thing. And I love the idea of that integrated use. I love that, and that we already allow that. It would be fantastic if we just, like for our commercial zoning, let's just make our commercial zoning all integrated. Why not remove our artificial barriers between our commercial, because we're going so much to mixed anyway in lots of areas. Why not take the interior integrated concept and just apply that to our business area? Is that something you'd be open to? I mean, have to have even more expanded, not just integrated inside, but integrated as a concept for all of our business to talk about?
I think one of the things is that I'm gonna have to have staff take a look at that and what are some of the things that are outside of our purview. But I think with regard to integrated use, for instance, childcare with a bar, I don't know, next door. Is there something that in our plans? Okay, let me go back to our commercial use. This was the two office buildings that's across the street from Cornerstone and all of that, and it's all office use, but they wanted to have childcare services. And so that was going to have an impact on the people, because we don't allow it except for a conditional use. And the thing is, it was the businesses around there when you have children running around and playing when they are conducting business. Or the other part was they didn't have enough play area and parking. So these are some of the things I think for public safety and for the safety of those children. So I think there are some things, I'm okay with looking at integrated use, but I think there are some uses that perhaps are not compatible one to the other, and we should take a look. That's why some of those are conditional.
Well, then
Yeah.
that sounds like there is something to have staff look at and
Yeah.
maybe discuss further at a
Yeah,
work
and
session
that's-
then.
And that's what I want to look at. I just want to make
Yeah.
sure that there is some public safety stuff in that. Jenny, and then I'll go here.
I just want to make sure I understand, Councilmember Schultz, members of the council, what the question is, right? So,
Yeah.
commercial zoning, I mean, we have mixed-use zoning that allows residential mixed with commercial, same building, same neighborhood, same district, right?
Yeah.
So to me, integrated is what's happening inside a building, right?
Yeah.
Mixed
Integrated
use
and
is what happens kind of more so outside the buildings, where we mix commercial
Yeah.
use with residential. So you're asking for more residential or industrial to be added into commercial zoning.
Yeah.
That's what you would like to see? That's my question.
I'm asking if we could have a discussion about moving our business zoning as a block to mixed.
Okay. I would like, I'm not opposed to that, but I'm also listening to some of the complaints we had from others where you have a business that is an industrial business next door, doing, Jenny, help me out. This is the business that is doing
The marble place?
work
Those
with
cutting-
marble,
yeah,
marble
cutting
and
noise
granite.
it creates,
Around Travelers, where they're making so much noise, they lift the door, and it creates so much noise, not only to the residential area, but to the businesses on both sides. So that has been a lot of complaints. So I would like staff to really take a look at the compatibility of those kinds of things with regard to our business, and also for safety, public safety, and also the compatibility of businesses one to the other. And because right now, I just think that business is creating a lot of hardship to the residents across the street. Yeah,
That's a good example of like a manufacturing operation, which is not typically found in mixed-use developments. You know, where you've got a marble manufacturing, we're cutting, they're creating massive noise, dust,
yeah,
et cetera, in a building where there's residents above. It's really more service, retail, and other light types of offices.
yeah.
You know,
that-
so
that
maybe we
is-
just need to
absolutely.
delineate mixed, that doesn't include heavy manufacturing as part of that. But I'm in 100% agreement. I mean, I think there's a lot of zones in the city where we just go mixed because that's the future, that's where all the development's going anyway. And you really want to sort of create the environment that the developers look at and go, oh, Burnsville's got an open door to a mixed-use project in this entire area. I've got an idea for where I can come in and maybe take out an old dated building and put a mixed use in there. Great. It just wouldn't involve heavy manufacturing or manufacturing as part of it.
But
in
I
my
think we already have that when we have the village plan where we've been talking to Seritage, having sort of a WeWorks office in the first level and then residential on the top level. So that integrated mixed use is there. There's integrated use under one roof, but there's integrated use. Jenny?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, so I'm hearing consensus to talk about this, to bring this back.
Yeah.
My question to you is, do you want this added to like the planning commission work plan for next year? We're pretty booked this year. We're working on the parking ordinance now and the TOD ordinance. Or do you want this to come back to you at a work session?
Yeah.
How does the process look to you?
I
Okay.
would-
I would say bring it back to us, and then we can direct it
how
to
do you want
planning.
it? What's your preference?
You know what,
It can come
Madam
back to us.
Mayor and council members, I'd want to take a look at our work session
Yeah.
through the rest of the year, because I think they're getting a little booked, and I'd want to talk with Jenny about, kind
Yeah.
of the time that
What-
she thinks it would take
I would
for us
say
to
just come
do
back
this.
to us what is feasible. It's not urgent, but we're trying to get ahead of the trends.
We'll report back to the council
Yeah,
on the timing.
yeah. Okay,
I agree with what's been discussed here. I especially agree with the integrated
Use.
interiors of buildings.
Oh, right?
Yeah, no
Yeah.
doubt. So yes, that's the direction we definitely have to go.
Okay, very good. So that's that, and
And I already know
so,
the liquor laws on that one, so
yeah,
we don't have to discuss it.
We got that covered.
yeah. Okay, so the next item on roundtable, and again, this is also getting council to direct staff, and then it's work that needs to be done. So Kara, it's setback language and escrow requirements.
Yes, and actually, I will defer that to Counselor Keeley.
I don't know if I brought it up once before. Can I bring it up
It was
again?
last week.
You can,
Last month.
you can.
As Councilmember Schultz pointed out, she wasn't here at our discussion, at our last work session, when we talked about the accessory structure, shed in this case, setback. It's 10 feet off the back property line. It's 5 feet off your abutting property line if it's another neighbor. But when there's a road abutting a side of your property, it is now at 20?
30. It's the
30.
same as a front yard setback,
Gotcha.
because it's a street.
30. So you have probably something in the 15 to 20 range setback off the street to your property line. Then you've got another 30 feet before you can put the edge of your accessory shed in your backyard. And if you have a fenced-in backyard, which is the example that brought this to my attention, a fenced-in backyard, you look at it and it just doesn't seem to have a lot of common sense to force the person who has that street there to, instead of going 5 feet or even 10 feet, which would match the back, they gotta go 30 feet over before they can put their shed, which puts the shed kind of in the middle of a backyard. In this particular person's case, that's an uneven surface, so that creates a problem. For anybody else, it just sticks the shed pretty much in the middle of the backyard, only because they have a road next to them. But everybody else gets to stick it 5 feet from their fence or their property line and 10 feet from the back. And so, looking at it, I questioned the rationale of that setback and recommended that we consider taking it down to 10 to match the backyard setback, or maybe 15 if that was the better judgment of the council. But I definitely think it needs to be reduced. I don't think we need to penalize people who have a road abutting that their storage shed or accessory structure has to go so far off their property line that it sticks it potentially in the middle of their backyard, and then creates two small little yards on either side that become much less usable, because you're just forcing them to put it where no one else has to put it, just because there's a road next to them. I just think it's unfair to those people. So-
Okay, and I think we already direct staff to take a look at that and come back. Did we?
Madam Mayor, the direction I have at the time was to, let's see here. It was, were we gonna bring it back to future work session?
Yeah.
Because there was not
Yeah.
enough votes to
Correct.
change it at the last work session,
Well,
so
we
it's
couldn't change it at the
coming
last.
back.
Yeah, we couldn't change.
Yeah,
it was
Yeah,
part of
we
the
gonna
cleanup
add it to
No,
language.
we can't change it until we direct staff to
Yes.
bring information back, so that we understand what it is and how that, what the code would look like.
Correct, Madam Mayor, if I can correct myself, there wasn't consensus or enough majority vote to add it to the housekeeping ordinance, which
Yeah.
was shortly coming
Yeah.
right
We
after.
couldn't quite
and-
get
Did
across the
Joel tell
finish
us though
line.
that we couldn't because it hasn't gone
No,
through
it
the
was-
process?
That was
No,
prior.
a month ago we
Yeah.
could have, but last meeting we could not.
Yeah, so what we need to do is direct staff to bring it back, the information back.
The other point about this is, when a person wants to deviate from that and say, well, can I put my shed 10 or 15 or whatever off the property line? Yes, it has to come through escrow and the council and planning commission, and they pay a dollar amount. In this case, happens to be a dollar amount that was probably in excess of the cost of building the shed. So there's an unnecessary hardship that this particular situation puts on everybody who has a side road. I can't even imagine what it would be like if the person has a lot with roads on all three sides, like we dealt with. Like, where does that shed go?
Yeah, I think one of the things,
Where
Michelle,
could that one go? It goes 30 feet from all sides, so, it's gonna be stuck close to the back of their house. So anyway, I think adjusting this to a smaller setback will allow more people who have side road abutting the property to put a shed in without having to go through the expense of an escrow and a special counsel, or, council authority to grant the variance.
And the
And I
escrow
think,
fees itself.
I'm just looking at the notes from the last meeting. So Jenny was so Ms. Faulkner noted that there are additional issues with this lot, and this proposed change to the ordinance may not address all the issues of the property, and suggested that council discussion focus on the ordinance and not a specific lot. So staff can bring back the impact of changing from 20 to 10-foot setbacks on corner lots throughout the city, because any reduction in setback would need to maintain safety sightlines. And I remember that that was one of the pieces that we needed to focus on, were the safety sightlines.
But that's not
So,
an issue.
and that's what staff is going to
Right.
bring back.
This is an accessory structure in the backyard.
Okay.
Right now, there's sightline issues if you have a big pine tree on the corner. That's far worse than a building would provide.
Okay. So staff's
So
going to
it's
bring
coming
it
back
back.
for discussion then, right?
That'll be good for everybody and not just one particular property.
No, as I noted in the last meeting, this was about, this example highlighted, in my opinion, why I brought it up, something in our code that I didn't agree with, and I was asking for council discussion and support to change it to 10 feet.
Yeah. And then staff is going to go back and take a look at the sight lines for all properties and making sure that we have safety.
We just wanted to get it done sooner than later, but they're busy in that
Yeah,
department.
so the thing is, it's the whole thing about priorities. Do you want this to be a priority or other stuff that's?
Well, we clearly missed the opportunity to throw it in that housekeeping because we didn't have enough information at the time, but I would propose that we try and push it through another housekeeping process and not drag it out 3 or 4 or 5 months to get it done.
Well, how about if
Because we're
staff
missing the
come back and
construction
tell
season
us?
for everybody who would like to put one out,
Okay.
not just this one person.
Yeah. Well, they'll take a look at the sight lines also, because that's what one of the concerns was, the safety sight lines. And you had to take a look at all of the different properties and say, is it the right setback?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, I will do whatever the consensus here is. So I'm still hearing differing opinions. I'm kind of confused. So if we're sticking to what the previous motion and minutes
Yeah.
were, we can do that. We'll add it to a future work session and bring it back. But if folks want to do something else, I'll do whatever the wishes of the council.
What's the ask?
To change the setback on abutting side roads to 10 feet from what it's currently at, period end.
And,
The side yard setback.
Yep, the side yard
Councilmember?
setback, it's a simple change, not simple, but it's a change to our current ordinance that lists the setbacks of 5 feet and 10 feet from the back property line, 5 feet if it's a neighbor, and it's 20 or 30, whatever it is, it's big, 30, to reduce that to 10, to equate to the same as the setback on the back property line, which is set at 10 no matter where you're at.
And
Okay,
Madam Mayor and
yeah.
council members, to Jenny's point, I don't think staff has a strong preference. We want to be certain that any decision that we're making is thoughtfully considered and the impacts of that change. And honestly, without taking a look at it,
at all
we
properties.
can't tell you that there wouldn't be unintended negative consequences,
Yeah.
which I think would be something the council would want to weigh in on their decision-making. So, again, to Ms. Faulkner's point, we're happy to make the change. We can do that. I mean, it's a council decision. If you want more information to make sure that it's the direction you want to go, we're happy to do that as well.
I would like to see it, that the safety aspects are considered, and not just saying, let's do it at 20%, or 10
10 feet?
10 feet. And because I don't know whether that 10 feet,
That's from the
It's-
property end, by the way, not from the road. The road, setback
Yeah.
from the road to
No,
the property line
I
is already.
understand, but I want to make sure that it
15,
has the
20 feet.
safety aspects into all of that, to all properties. And it takes time for staff to do that work. And I agree with Melanie and Jenny that it takes time for them to evaluate all of the properties and not just one property.
Yeah,
Kara.
and maybe I'm getting confused on this, so please help me. What is the setback for a fence on a side road?
I don't have that memorized,
I
Councilmember
know, I don't either,
Schultz.
so,
Yeah, is in between properties, it's up to the property line, not on the property
Yeah.
line, but there is, I believe it's within the building envelope, which is 30 feet, then you can go 8 feet high on a residential fence. Outside of the building envelope, I believe it's 6 feet high, except in the front yard, it can only be 42 inches high and has to be 75% open. I
Right.
think that's the rule.
so if they're gonna put a fence on their side property with a road. That, the fence would have to be at the, how far of a setback? you
I
know?
I don't have that information handy, and it might be different if it's side yard abutting a street, because we have so many privacy
Right.
fences around town abutting a street, so it's probably, a lesser standard, because it's not someone's front yard where their house or their address or their driveway is, so there's probably an exception written for that.
Right, and I just
guessing.
ask because if we're talking about sight lines and we allow a fence,
Right.
but you have to go 20 feet more in to do a shed, which would be the same height, then that seems silly, but I didn't, I don't know. I should have looked that
There
up, but
are,
I don't
I
know.
mean, there, in this particular case, the setback of a property line from the road and then going another 10, let alone 30 feet, we're overkilling the safety issue because the fence line and the landscaping are a definite safety concern from sightlines. These buildings are not gonna even come close to what exists today with the fence and the landscaping. They create significant sightline barriers, but we allow them. They can plant a row of pine trees. They can put a fence up. We don't have a problem with that. But we're saying the building has to be another 30 feet inside their backyard? That makes absolutely no sense whatsoever to me against the safety concerns.
Okay.
You know, understand?
Yeah.
I mean, it's the
Yeah.
fence and the landscaping. That's the safety sightline concern, not these accessory buildings.
That's a convincing argument.
Okay. Well, okay, so it makes sense, because I did go by and look at that property.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's on 134th and Nicollet, right?
Nicollet End,
130.
something Lane,
Marianne.
Mary Ann.
What is it?
Marion,
Marianne.
Mary Ann
Oh,
Lane.
okay.
Yeah.
Nicollet and Marion.
And there's a few that have fences along Nicollet there. I mean,
Yeah.
again,
Because there was a
we're
fence on
saying
Nicollet
you can
that I
put up
saw
a
it.
fence line which blocks visibility and landscaping. Oh, but if you want to put a shed up, well, that's got to be in the middle of your backyard, further away from the road. Just,
Okay.
everything I looked at in this particular example led me to this setback ordinance is outdated. And there must be another reason for it.
yeah, yeah.
Jenny, how long will it take you to just take,
I think, Melanie, we
We
need to
can
look at the
debrief
work
tomorrow
session.
and
okay, and then just
We'll
send
report
us,
back to the council.
You got
yeah,
it.
We know what you want it
Okay.
as soon as possible, but
okay.
we've got plenty of other priorities on the list, and
I see the look in your eyes. Oh, my list keeps getting longer and longer.
Okay, and the other is the escrow.
Yeah, if we change the ordinance with the setback, then more people can walk in, give them the plans, be 10 foot off, just like they're 10 foot off the back, or 5 foot, pay a permit fee of 60 or 70 bucks, and go build their shed. That's what they should be able to do, even in this circumstance. In this case, he has to put $2,000 up, or 15 or 1,700, and come through us just to get the right to go inside that 30 foot.
Okay.
That's why I want to change the ordinance. His example just shined a light on what I think is a bad ordinance. Everybody else that probably would want to put a shed up is probably maybe not, or they would be forced, if they want to put it closer to their fence, to the property line, they would have to be coming through us for a variance and paying the price.
So you want to do this administratively and take the escrow amount off for this
For-
particular?
Oh, for this particular one, that would be great, so he can go forward with his project as long as the
But
majority of the council is giving direction that 10 foot is acceptable.
But for the escrow for these accessory structures is what you want, no escrow for?
Well, there's only an escrow if they're asking for a variance. There is no escrow if they're coming in, building within the confines of our ordinance. This change in the ordinance would allow this person and anybody else wanting to put one in their backyard to do it within the confines of our ordinance, wouldn't need an escrow,
Okay.
wouldn't need a variance. They
Okay.
could just pay their permit fee and
Okay,
build their building.
so, all right, so it would just give it to us and let us know, and then we can move forward with it.
Okay.
Okay, very good.
Thank you.
Roundtable reports. Vince?
There's I didn't prepare anything, but there's a, Burnsville Historical Society meeting tomorrow.
Okay.
And, we were down at the festival last week with Bernie the fire dog. Tori Workman, dressed up and I think had more fun than the kids did.
She did a great job.
And,
Did.
we'll be going down, for the rest of the festivals with that
Okay.
set up. So that's all I got.
Dakota Broadband's tomorrow, we've got the offer out for the director. They haven't accepted yet, so we're extending the contract for our consultant until that happens. And Burnsville CVB retreats next week, and I'll have a report on that next month.
Okay. Kara?
We are agreeing to ask Dakota County to look at taking over management of the emergency services dispatch. I don't know how excited Dakota County
Boy,
is to
I've-
do that.
This is for the DCC. Oh, my God, that has been the discussion.
So, we'll see, but we'll ask.
Never hurts to ask
Right.
again.
Well, yeah, we'll
Yeah.
ask.
Okay. Okay. Dan?
I-35 June meeting is this Thursday, so our May meeting, we had discussions on our project priorities development, which our own Public Works Director, Mr. Peterson, heads up. Following that meeting, we had a really nice Orange Line tour, Orange Line stop tour from Richfield all the way into downtown and back to Burnsville, and then back to Richfield. So we did a full loop. Most of them are still under construction, so it was more like pictures and a handout and pointing over there, going, in that intersection, this is gonna look like this. But we did have the Met Council president with us, or chair, sorry. And it was a great trip. We had a TV station travel with us on the bus and gave us a great story and coverage. MBTA board, we are, come on, there we go. We are, oops, where'd it go? Still installing our new Avail transit system. It's a monitoring GPS, video cameras, monitors everything in real time. It's a very, very modern system for our bus. And not every, this particular system, there's another transit provider that uses Avail, but I can't remember who that is. Anyway, it's state-of-the-art. It's a long process, a very expensive capital investment, but everything is going well. It's going according to plan, and there has been no hiccups along the way. So it's been a very well-managed project by both Luther and the board. And then Apple Valley Transit Station expansion on Cedar. There was a groundbreaking yesterday, which I tried to get to, but I had the time wrong on my calendar and had meetings planned when it was happening, so I couldn't make it. But the little shovel photo op, and we've been looking at plans and giving some feedback on the design, lighting and exterior design, that kind of stuff. So big expansion there. That's pretty much it. Thank you.
Melanie and I attended our legislative commission meeting, municipal legislative commission meeting, and she had sent out all of the information to all of you. Most of our time was taken up debriefing on the legislative session, and I hope that you all saw that our TIF bill, which was carried on the House side, but not on the Senate side, didn't make it into the omnibus bill. And if you looked at it, we were the only ones that didn't get in. And I'm not a happy camper there. So you got all of that information, but that's the most, I think, of relevance to us. And our Savage Burnsville meeting took place last month, later last month, I think. And a lot of it was updates on water, on infrastructure, and then Savage wanted to understand which do we belong to NLC? And we belong to NLC and LMC, so they wanted to know whether we belonged, and we did. Is there anything else, Vincent, from the Savage Burnsville? A lot of it is looking on the 13 corridor.
Yeah.
Because you saw some of that input with regard to what's going to happen on
Can we
the
talk
13
about
corridor.
the Dan Patch line a little bit too?
The what?
Did
Oh,
that
yeah,
come up?
the Dan Patch line, which it's not going to impact us, but they were probably, because it'll only come from Savage and going north. That's all they're concerned about, but they wanted to know if we support them. It's not going to have any impact on
Can't talk
us.
about it in St. Paul anyways.
They're going to go that
Still
way.
in place?
Yeah. And then the Burnsville Community Foundation meets on Thursday, but I've been doing some work to help raise funds, and I raised $25,000 for them for homage. So I think I'm
job.
good with that. And then the other thing is just of interest to all of you is that our wonderful Lions again made contributions to our park system for our inclusive park. So it's between $70,000 and $120,000
Amazing.
that we're going to do for Red Oak Park, and this is the inclusive one. And so the check is coming in too. So at first it was, we agreed to 140, but what you've heard is that 70,000 there is over and above the 120, so we have a total of, we agreed to 140, and then the 70,000 is over and above that. So that comes to a total of $190,000 that Lions is giving to the city. So I just want you all to understand
Fantastic.
that this club raises money and gives back to the city of Burnsville and to the city of Savage. And then we also support the things that we do for the university with regard to eyes and heart and diabetes. So these are things that we also support financially from the Lions Club. So when you see a lion, thank them. And if you want to give them a hug, give them a hug. Show them some love.
Everyone tackle Elizabeth.
Yeah, but the other thing is that they're also going to be, we're going to also be helping with the Jazz Fest.
Yes, I heard that.
Oh,
Okay.
fantastic.
Well, we're going to be volunteering, so
That's really
we're going to
fire
be
muster in the
doing
race.
that.
Yeah.
I guess your
If you
country.
get any love,
Huh?
with the firemen to your country.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Deal.
So, but I just want you, yeah,
You need
and
to network with those Lions.
I think I got some more money for our international festival, so I have been busy raising money. I think I'm settled.
Why stop now?
If you're not done, you can hop over to Fire Muster. I can give you a list.
I think this entire group's been out raising money this year.
I know, but all of that said, that's where I'm at right now, and so Burnsville Community Foundation International Festival, all of that's good, and then we're going to start here with Metro Cities policy, starting
Oh,
next month.
Next month,
In
yeah.
July.
Yeah, we'll all be.
I noticed they only sent one calendar event for July. I didn't get August and September. Was that, normally they sent them all
I
three
got
at once.
July and August. I don't know if I got September.
Okay.
Hmm.
Okay.
Oh,
Typically, what is on your
Oh, is that
side?
what it is?
Yeah.
I mean, I got a calendar.
Yeah.
event.
Okay. So
But yeah,
is there anything
I'll have to
else,
look at
Jenny, from your side? Melanie, anything else you need?
No, Madam Mayor,
Michelle?
thank you.
I like to move to tomorrow.
If there's nothing else on the council side, we stand adjourned.